Take your babies and get out. My mother-in-law screamed, her voice cutting through the freezing Atlanta wind. My husband stood beside her, forcing me and our 10-day-old twins out into the snow. They thought they were discarding a broke, struggling designer with nowhere to go. They had no idea that 9 days later, I would be the one foreclosing on their entire existence. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against a toxic family who completely underestimated your worth. My name is Maya. I am 32 years old, and the bitter chill of that January night is something I will never forget. I stood on the pristine marble porch of my in-laws' sprawling Buckhead estate, clutching my newborns Leo and Zara tightly to my chest to shield them from the biting wind. They were barely 10 days old, born slightly premature, still so tiny and fragile. They were wrapped in thin receiving blankets that were absolutely no match for the unexpected winter storm that had descended upon the city. Just inside the grand, brightly lit entryway stood Beatrice, my mother-in-law. She was the undisputed matriarch of Atlanta's African-American elite, a woman whose entire identity was wrapped up in country club memberships, charity galas, and generational wealth. She adjusted her expensive silk shawl, looking down at me with a mixture of triumph and absolute disgust. "This family has a legacy to uphold, Maya," she sneered, her voice echoing off the towering custom columns of the estate. "We simply do not have room for a broke seamstress who tricked my son into marriage by conveniently getting pregnant. You thought giving me grandchildren would secure your place in high society, but you thought wrong." I looked past her to Marcus, my husband of 2 years. The man who had held my hand in the delivery room just over a week ago was now staring at the imported Italian tile floor, completely avoiding my eyes. Marcus was a junior partner at his mother's law firm, a man who had always cared infinitely more about his inheritance than his independence. Instead of defending his wife and his shivering newborn children, he proved exactly how much of a spineless coward he truly was. Marcus reached into his tailored slacks, pulled out a crumpled $500 bill, and tossed it onto the frozen porch at my feet. "Sign the divorce papers when they arrive," he muttered, finally glancing up with a coldness that shattered whatever remaining illusion of love I still held on to. "There is a cheap motel 2 blocks down the road. That cash should cover a few nights until you figure it out. Just go, Maya." Before I could even process the magnitude of his betrayal, a slow, mocking clap came from the driveway. Liam, my sister-in-law. Chloe's husband leaned casually against the hood of his custom black Porsche, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. Liam was a white, highly privileged investment banker who had married into the family and constantly weaponized his own old money trust fund status. He loved to remind everyone, especially me, of his supposedly superior pedigree. Throughout my marriage, he had never missed an opportunity to throw thinly veiled microaggressions about my background, my race, and my career. And, "Do you need me to call you an Uber, Maya?" Liam chuckled, taking a slow, arrogant sip of his drink. "My family trust fund is not a charity for freelance artists who cannot make ends meet. Maybe this is a good lesson for you. It is time to learn how to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, just like the rest of us hardworking folks." The sheer audacity of his words almost made me laugh out loud. Liam had never worked a hard day in his entire life, coasting entirely on generational wealth, while looking down his nose at anyone who actually had to build their own path. For 2 long years, I had endured their relentless financial and social abuse. I had played the role of the quiet, struggling textile designer. I wore simple clothes, drove a modest car, and let them believe I was desperately dependent on Marcus and his family wealth. I endured Beatrice's constant remarks about my lack of pedigree and Liam's classist jokes at formal family dinners, all to keep the peace for my husband's sake. They thought I was a desperate gold digger who had trapped their precious son. They believed I was utterly powerless, standing in the snow with 2 infants and a discarded piece of cash, completely at their mercy. They were incredibly, fundamentally wrong. I did not cry. I did not beg Marcus to let us back inside the warm house. I did not scream at Beatrice or try to justify my worth to a man like Liam. I simply adjusted my hold on my shivering babies, bent down with quiet dignity, and picked up the crumpled $500 bill from the icy marble floor. I looked Marcus dead in the eye, offering him a calm, chilling smile that made him take a noticeable step backward into the foyer. "Enjoy the house, Marcus," I said softly. I turned my back on the sprawling estate and walked down the long, sweeping driveway as the snow continued to fall heavily around me. The heavy wrought iron gates clicked shut behind me, officially locking me out in the cold. But the very moment I was out of their sight, my entire posture changed. The submissive, struggling wife disappeared into the winter night. I shifted the twins securely into one arm, ensuring they were protected from the wind, and pulled my phone from my heavy coat pocket. I bypassed my regular contacts and dialed a secure encrypted number I had not used in months. My private wealth manager answered on the very first ring. "Good evening, ma'am." His crisp, highly professional voice came through the receiver. "Send the Maybach to the corner of Oak and Peachtree," I instructed, my voice sharp, clear, and commanding. "And initiate Protocol Alpha immediately." "Understood, ma'am. Right away." He did not ask questions. He knew exactly what that meant. For 2 years, I had hidden my true identity from my husband and his toxic social climbing family. I was not a struggling freelance textile designer working gig to gig. I was the anonymous founder, sole owner, and CEO of Lumina Holdings, an international real estate and investment conglomerate worth billions. I had built my empire in absolute secrecy, operating under a complex web of LLCs to protect my assets and my peace. I had deliberately downplayed my success because I wanted a marriage based on genuine love, not financial exploitation. But tonight, Marcus and his family had shown me exactly who they were. They had thrown my 10-day-old babies into the freezing cold to protect their arrogant, fragile egos. The time for hiding in the shadows was over. The time for absolute, undeniable consequences had begun. The walk to the corner of Oak and Peachtree felt longer than it actually was. The wind cut through my thin wool coat, but the adrenaline rushing through my veins kept the cold at bay. I held Leo and Zara close, their tiny bodies pressed against my chest. They were quiet, thankfully lulled to sleep by the rhythmic crunch of my boots against the frozen pavement. I reached the street corner just as my phone vibrated in my pocket. Shifting the twins to one side, I pulled it out. The screen lit up with a message from Marcus. "I canceled your joint credit card. Do not even try to crawl back here begging when you realize you have nothing." I stared at the glowing words, a harsh laugh escaping my throat. He actually thought that card mattered to me. For the past 2 years, he had monitored every penny I spent on that joint account, interrogating me over grocery bills and baby supplies, while he freely blew thousands on custom golf clubs and lavish lunches with his country club friends. He thought cutting off a credit card with a meager $5,000 limit was a death sentence. Headlights pierced the dark street. A sleek, armored Mercedes Maybach glided silently to a halt right in front of me, its dark-tinted windows reflecting the falling snow. Before the car even came to a complete stop, the driver's side door swung open. Thomas, my head of security and personal driver, leapt out into the storm. He was impeccably dressed in his standard black suit, completely ignoring the freezing temperatures. In his arms, he carried 2 thick, heated cashmere blankets. He did not ask questions. He simply wrapped the warm fabric securely around my babies, shielding them completely from the bitter wind. "Please, step inside, ma'am," Thomas said, holding open the heavy, reinforced rear door. I slid into the expansive back seat, sinking into the heated leather. The cabin was a sanctuary of warmth and quiet luxury. Thomas closed the door, sealing us off from the brutal winter night and the toxic family I had just left behind. As the Maybach pulled away from the curb, leaving the elite Buckhead neighborhood in the rearview mirror, I let out a long, shuddering breath. I looked down at my children, now safely cocooned in warmth, and thought about the massive deception I had maintained for so long. Marcus and Beatrice believed I was a struggling textile designer because that was exactly what I designed them to believe. Early in my relationship with Marcus, I realized his financial appetite was insatiable and his mother's need for control was pathological. Beatrice routinely went through our mail, demanding to see bank statements, under the guise of offering financial advice to the newlyweds. Marcus never stopped her. In fact, he constantly drained his own trust fund and demanded I contribute my meager freelance earnings to fund his luxury car leases and designer watches. So I protected myself. I created Lumina Holdings through a labyrinth of blind trusts and anonymous limited liability companies incorporated in Delaware and offshore. While Marcus spent his evenings drinking scotch with Liam and complaining about his mother's overbearing presence at the law firm, I was in my home office building an empire. I acquired commercial real estate, invested heavily in emerging technology startups, and secured government contracts under my corporate umbrella. When my company closed a multi-million-dollar deal, I celebrated quietly with a cup of tea. When my personal net worth crossed the billion-dollar mark, I went out and bought a $20 sweater from a discount rack just to keep up the charade. I played the part of the financially dependent wife, flawlessly enduring their constant belittling because the alternative meant exposing my wealth to a family of greedy, entitled narcissists who would stop at nothing to take it all. I knew if Beatrice ever discovered the true extent of my assets, she would find a legal loophole to lay claim to them. She would have used her high-powered law firm to bury me in litigation and bleed me dry. My reflections were interrupted by a soft chime from the console between the seats. The secure encrypted communication line was flashing. I tapped the screen to accept the call. David, my lead private wealth manager, came through the speakers. His voice was crisp and urgent. "Good evening, Maya. I apologize for the late hour, but my team just uncovered the exact reason why Beatrice and Marcus evicted you so suddenly tonight. We received the intelligence reports from the corporate moles we placed inside her law firm." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. "Tell me, David, what did you find?" "Beatrice's firm is not just struggling," David explained, the steady hum of the Maybach engine providing a backdrop to his words. "They are facing a catastrophic $15 million deficit. The audit discovered massive systematic embezzlement. It appears Beatrice and Marcus have been funneling client escrow funds into their personal offshore accounts for years to maintain their lavish lifestyle. The firm is weeks away from total insolvency and a federal investigation." I processed this information, the pieces of tonight's puzzle rapidly falling into place. "Why tonight?" I asked. "Why throw me and the twins out into a snowstorm right now?" "They needed the house empty," David replied immediately. "Beatrice is secretly mortgaging the entire Buckhead estate to a private high-interest lending group. She plans to use the cash to quietly replace the missing $15 million before the Bar Association realizes the escrow accounts are empty. The private lenders required an immediate, unannounced physical appraisal of the property late tonight. Beatrice could not risk you being inside the house when the appraisers arrived. She could not risk you asking questions, hearing numbers, or demanding your legal marital rights to the property if you found out they were leveraging the roof over your head." A wave of pure, unfiltered clarity washed over me. They did not just throw me away because they hated me. They threw me out to cover up a felony. They viewed me and my newborn children as acceptable collateral damage in their desperate scramble to avoid federal prison. I looked down at Leo and Zara, their chests rising and falling peacefully in their cashmere cocoons. The days of playing the victim were officially over. I pressed the communication button on the console. "David," I said, my voice dangerously calm and laced with a newfound terrifying power, "I want you to intercept that lending group immediately. I do not care what premium you have to offer them to step away. I want Lumina Holdings to be the sole entity underwriting that transaction. Buy that mortgage tonight." David's voice came through the encrypted speaker with absolute certainty, confirming the transaction would be sealed before the sun rose. I ended the call and let the heavy silence of the armored Maybach wash over me. Outside the tinted windows, the Atlanta storm raged, turning the streets into a frozen wasteland, but inside I was entirely untouchable. The tires gripped the ice flawlessly as Thomas steered us away from the sprawling mansions of Buckhead and toward the gleaming, towering skyscrapers of downtown. We pulled into the secure subterranean garage of the Sapphire Tower, a high-rise luxury building where Lumina Holdings secretly owned the top 3 floors. Thomas parked the massive vehicle in my private bay. He stepped out, retrieved the twins, and flanked me as we walked to the biometric elevator. The doors slid open, and the retinal scanner bathed my face in a soft blue light before engaging the express lift. The doors parted with a soft chime opening directly into my $8 million penthouse. The space was a breathtaking expanse of imported Italian marble custom mahogany fixtures and floor-to-ceiling glass walls offering a panoramic, unobstructed view of the glittering Atlanta skyline. This was my true domain. Not the suffocating, dusty guest wing of Beatrice's estate, but a fortress in the sky built entirely by my own hands. Waiting for me in the grand foyer was Dr. Eris Sterling, one of the most sought-after private pediatricians in the Southeast, flanked by 2 elite neonatal nurses. I had placed them on a retainer the moment I found out I was pregnant, knowing I might need immediate discreet medical intervention. "Take them," I instructed, my voice unwavering as Thomas gently transferred the cashmere bundles into the nurses' waiting arms. "Check their core temperatures immediately. They were exposed to the wind for exactly 4 minutes. I want a full diagnostic run." Dr. Sterling gave a crisp nod. "We have the private nursery fully prepped, Miss Maya. The incubators are warmed and the monitoring equipment is online. We will not leave their side." I watched the medical team carry my children down the long, art-lined hallway toward the custom-built nursery. It was essentially a private neonatal intensive care unit stocked with millions of dollars in equipment. Marcus had mocked me for wanting to buy high-end cribs, claiming my freelance designer budget could not afford them. He had forced me to use a 30-year-old splintering bassinet from Beatrice's attic. The rage flared hot in my chest at the memory, but I forced it down. Emotion was a liability. Action was power. I walked into my master suite and stepped inside the massive walk-in closet. It was larger than the entire apartment Marcus and I had rented when we first got married. I caught my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirrors. I was wearing a faded, oversized maternity sweater, cheap leggings, and scuffed boots. It was the uniform of the subservient, struggling wife. It was the costume I wore to survive the daily grinding narcissism of Beatrice's household. She demanded I look poor so she could feel rich. She demanded I look small so she could feel grand. I reached up and unbuttoned the cheap sweater, letting it fall to the plush carpet. I kicked off the scuffed boots. I shed the identity of the helpless victim right there on the floor. I walked over to the glass display cases lining the walls and pulled out a bespoke tailored emerald green silk suit. I slipped into the crisp fabric, the perfect cut hugging my frame with authority. I stepped into a pair of black red-soled designer heels. I pulled my hair back into a sharp, uncompromising style. When I looked in the mirror again, the scared girl shivering on the marble porch was completely gone. Staring back at me was the ruthless, calculating CEO of Lumina Holdings. I strode out of the master suite and entered my home command center. The room was dominated by a massive curved mahogany desk and walls lined with encrypted digital monitors, displaying global market feeds, offshore account balances, and real estate portfolios. My executive night staff, a team of 4 brilliant analysts who managed my late-night acquisitions, stood at attention as I walked in. "Marcus thinks he cut off my access to funds," I announced to the room, my voice slicing through the silence like a blade. "He canceled a joint credit card that has a $5,000 limit. I want you to immediately freeze the dummy checking account I let him monitor. Route all those recurring auto-pay bills directly to his personal cell phone. Let him wake up to a mountain of declined payment alerts." My lead analyst, a sharp woman named Elena, nodded quickly, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "Done, ma'am. The decoy accounts are liquidated and closed." "What about the mortgage acquisition?" I asked, leaning over the desk to study the main monitor. "David's team just wired the funds," Elena confirmed, bringing up a secure ledger on the screen. "The private lending group accepted the premium buyout. Lumina Holdings is now the sole proprietor of the debt on Beatrice's estate. The paperwork will be finalized and legally binding by sunrise." "Excellent," I murmured, a cold satisfaction settling deep in my bones. I had spent 2 years biting my tongue, while Beatrice paraded around that mansion treating me like the hired help, demanding I scrub her baseboards, while Liam cracked jokes about my bank account. Now I literally owned the roof over their heads. I owned the floors they walked on. I owned their legacy. Before I could issue my next directive, the heavy double doors of the command center swung open. Thomas marched in his usual stoic expression, replaced by a look of tight, controlled fury. He was holding a secure tablet tightly in his massive hands. "Ma'am," Thomas said, his voice dropping an octave. "We have a situation developing. Our surveillance team monitoring the communication lines at the Buckhead estate just flagged a high-priority intercept." I stood up straight, smoothing the lapels of my silk jacket. "What did they do?" "Thomas, Beatrice just dialed emergency services," he replied, handing the tablet across the mahogany desk. "She bypassed the local precinct and demanded to be transferred directly to the emergency dispatch for Child Protective Services. She reported you for severe child endangerment." I stared at him, the air in the room dropping 10 degrees. "She did what?" "She filed a formal recorded report." Thomas continued, pointing to the audio file loading on the screen. "She told the state operators that you are completely homeless, severely mentally unstable, and currently wandering the freezing streets of Atlanta on foot with premature newborns. She gave them the address to your decoy apartment, claiming you are squatting in a derelict building without heat or running water." I looked down at the tablet, my emerald green suit catching the light from the monitors. Beatrice was not just trying to humiliate me anymore. She was actively trying to take my children. She was trying to weaponize the state against a woman she believed was too poor and too uneducated to fight back. She thought CPS would swoop in, snatch Leo and Zara from my arms, and hand them directly over to Marcus. She had just declared war. I turned to Thomas, my mind already moving 5 steps ahead of my treacherous mother-in-law. Beatrice thought she could use the child welfare system as a weapon to strip me of my babies. She thought her lies would be enough to destroy me, painting me as a desperate vagrant to cover up the fact that they had just thrown their own blood out into a deadly winter storm. I looked at the encrypted tablet in Thomas's hands, a cold smile touching my lips. I did not panic. Panic was for people who did not have infinite resources. "Thomas," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any fear. "Contact Evelyn Vance immediately. Tell her to meet the state agents at the decoy address. Give her full authorization to intercept them and bring them directly here." Evelyn Vance was not just a lawyer. She was the most feared family law litigator in the entire state of Georgia, a woman I kept on a very generous retainer for exactly this kind of unforeseen crisis. Within 20 minutes, a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb outside the rundown, dilapidated apartment building Beatrice had given to the emergency dispatchers. The neighborhood was notorious for high crime rates and crumbling infrastructure. It was exactly the kind of place a destitute, penniless woman would be forced to seek shelter in the dead of winter. 2 state agents, bundled in heavy coats and carrying thick clipboards, marched up the cracked concrete steps of the complex. They navigated the dimly lit, foul-smelling hallway, their faces set in grim lines. They were fully expecting to break down a door and find a hysterical mother trying to keep 2 freezing, neglected infants alive in a squalid room. They reached the door of apartment 4B, the decoy unit I maintained under a shell company to keep up my struggling artist charade for Marcus and his snooping mother. The lead agent knocked loudly, announcing their presence and demanding immediate entry. The door swung open, but instead of a broken, sobbing woman, they were met by Evelyn Vance. She stood in the doorway wearing a pristine designer trench coat, her posture radiating absolute legal authority. The apartment behind her was entirely empty, stripped bare and freezing cold. The agents froze, completely disoriented by the stark contrast between the frantic police report and the sharp, unbothered woman standing before them. "Good evening," Evelyn said, her voice crisp and deeply professional. "I assume you are here regarding the malicious and entirely fabricated report filed by Beatrice. I am Evelyn Vance, lead counsel for the mother of the children in question. My client is not here, and she is certainly not homeless. If you will follow me, I will take you to her actual residence so you can verify the absolute safety of the children." The agents exchanged bewildered glances, but had no choice but to comply with a lawyer of Evelyn's terrifying caliber. They followed her out of the decaying building and climbed into the back of her waiting luxury vehicle. The drive from the slums to the gleaming financial district took less than 15 minutes, but it carried them into a completely different universe. The car descended into the secure heated garage of the Sapphire Tower, and Evelyn escorted the silent, wide-eyed agents into the private biometric elevator. When the doors slid open to reveal my $8 million penthouse, the agents actually stopped in their tracks. They stepped off the elevator and looked around the massive, brilliantly lit foyer. The imported marble floors gleamed flawlessly. The custom mahogany fixtures radiated quiet, untouchable wealth. The panoramic glass walls showcased the entire Atlanta skyline, a breathtaking view reserved only for the absolute elite. This was the fortress of a billionaire, not the squalid den of a homeless vagrant. Evelyn led the stunned agents down the wide, art-lined hallway, their heavy boots silent on the plush artisan rugs. They approached the nursery and I stepped out to meet them. I was no longer the submissive, exhausted woman in scuffed boots and faded maternity clothes. I stood tall in my bespoke emerald green silk suit, my posture radiating the commanding presence of a chief executive officer. I extended my hand, introducing myself calmly, completely ignoring their shocked expressions. "You are here to check on the welfare of my children," I said, motioning for them to step inside the massive room. "Please come in and see for yourselves." The agents walked into the room and immediately stopped writing on their clipboards. The nursery was a breathtaking masterpiece of modern neonatal care. The air was clinically purified and temperature controlled to the exact degree required for premature infants. Soft ambient lighting filled the space. Standing by the state-of-the-art incubators was Dr. Eris Sterling, flanked by two highly trained neonatal nurses in pristine scrubs. They were meticulously monitoring the twins' vital signs on digital screens, adjusting the heated cashmere blankets that swaddled my peacefully sleeping babies. The lead CPS agent, a seasoned woman who had likely seen every tragic form of child neglect imaginable, let out a slow, stuttering breath. "This is a level 1 trauma care setup," she murmured, looking from the millions of dollars worth of medical equipment to my tailored suit. "The report we received stated you had zero income. Your mother-in-law claimed you were completely incapable of providing basic shelter, let alone premium round-the-clock medical care. She explicitly stated you were wandering the frozen streets, intentionally endangering the lives of these premature infants." I looked the agent dead in the eye, my voice steady and laced with a hard, undeniable truth. "My mother-in-law is a desperate, vindictive liar who is currently drowning in her own financial crimes. For 2 years, I was forced to hide my true financial status just to survive her narcissistic household. If Beatrice knew the extent of my assets, she would have used her corrupt law firm to drain me dry, just as my husband constantly drained his own trust fund to fund his vanity, while forcing me to use hand-me-down baby gear. I built my entire empire in secret to protect myself and my future children from their insatiable greed. The only danger my children were ever in was living under their roof." Evelyn Vance stepped forward holding a sleek digital tablet. She tapped the screen once and handed it directly to the lead agent. "My client is not the danger here," Evelyn stated coldly. "The real threat is the family who called you tonight." The agent looked down at the tablet. The screen illuminated with high-definition security footage I had discreetly pulled from the estate's own external camera network. The audio was crystal clear. The video showed the massive marble porch of the Buckhead mansion, surrounded by swirling, violent snow. It showed me standing there, terrified, clutching my tiny, fragile babies to my chest to shield them from the wind. It captured Beatrice's hateful sneer as she demanded I leave her property. It captured Marcus, the man who was supposed to protect his family, violently, shoving me toward the frozen driveway and throwing a crumpled piece of cash at my feet, as if I were garbage. It captured Liam leaning against his luxury car, laughing and dropping cruel, classist insults, while two newborn babies were maliciously exposed to a deadly winter storm. The footage played in agonizing detail, highlighting the sheer cruelty and absolute lack of humanity displayed by Marcus and his family. The CPS agent stood in my immaculate multi-million-dollar nursery surrounded by elite medical professionals and watched a video of a father intentionally and violently endangering the lives of his 10-day-old premature twins. The lead agent watched the video twice in total silence. The color drained from her face, replaced by a rigid professional fury. She handed the tablet back to Evelyn, her jaw tight. She looked at the sleeping twins safely breathing in their warm incubators and then looked directly at me. The protocol for false reporting is strict, but the protocol for what we just witnessed on that video is absolute. The agent squared her shoulders, her voice echoing with the full, devastating weight of the law. We are opening an immediate criminal investigation into your husband. The morning sun cast a brilliant golden glow over the immaculate fairways of the Piedmont Elite Country Club. Marcus stood on the 18th tee, a custom titanium driver, resting casually against his shoulder. He was surrounded by the exact type of men he had spent his entire life trying to impress senior partners, hedge fund managers, and old money heirs, who practically ran Atlanta's financial district. He took a long drag from an imported Cuban cigar, exhaling a thick cloud of smoke as he reveled in the crisp winter air. He felt completely invincible. He had just spent the last 4 holes regaling his audience with the highly edited, completely fabricated tale of our separation. I finally had to cut the dead weight loose. Marcus chuckled, adjusting his designer visor. He leaned in, lowering his voice conspiratorially, as if sharing a corporate secret. You all know how it is. You try to be charitable, you marry a girl from a modest background, give her a taste of the good life, and suddenly she thinks she is entitled to the family vault. She became an absolute leech, refused to work constantly, demanded access to my trust fund, and then tried to use the twins as leverage. His friend Preston, a commercial real estate tycoon, shook his head in mock sympathy while taking a sip from his crystal tumbler of scotch. Good for you, Marcus. You have to protect your assets from gold diggers like that. What did you do with her? I gave her a reality check, Marcus sneered, stepping up to the tee and taking a practice swing. I handed her some cash for a cheap motel, canceled her credit cards, and locked her out. Let her pull herself up by her bootstraps. She will be crawling back to my mother's firm by Monday, begging for a settlement, but I am going to bleed her dry in family court. I am keeping the house and the kids. She gets nothing. The men erupted into a chorus of approving laughter, clinking their glasses together in a toast to Marcus's newfound freedom and his utter ruthlessness. Marcus beamed, basking in their validation. He planted his feet, gripping his club, ready to drive the ball straight down the fairway. Excuse me. Marcus Vance. The harsh, booming voice did not belong to a caddy or a fellow club member. It cut through the refined, quiet atmosphere of the green like a siren. Marcus halted his swing, spinning around with a scowl of deep annoyance. His irritation instantly morphed into shock. Marching straight across the pristine, dew-covered putting green were 2 fully uniformed Atlanta police officers, their heavy-duty boots leaving deep, muddy indentations in the manicured grass. Trailing nervously behind them was the club manager, his face pale and sweating profusely as he wrung his hands. Marcus lowered his club, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. What is the meaning of this? Do you have any idea where you are? You cannot just walk onto the 18th hole. Are you? Marcus Vance, the lead officer, asked again, stepping directly into Marcus's personal space, completely unfazed by the immense wealth surrounding him. Yes, I am Marcus Vance. He snapped, his voice rising in panic as he noticed Preston and the other men taking distinct immediate steps backward, distancing themselves from the approaching scandal. I am a junior partner at Vance & Associates. My mother is Beatrice Vance. If this is about a donation to the precinct, you can contact my secretary. The officer ignored the blatant attempt at name-dropping. He reached into his heavy utility vest and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents securely bound in a blue folder. He shoved the papers directly into Marcus's chest, forcing him to drop his expensive cigar to catch them. "Marcus Vance, you have officially been served," the officer declared, his voice projecting loudly enough for 3 adjacent golf groups to hear every single word. "This is a court-ordered immediate emergency restraining order, filed on behalf of your wife, Maya Vance, and your 2 infant children. You are legally barred from coming within 500 feet of them, their residence, or any medical facility they occupy." Marcus stared at the blue folder in his hands, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. A restraining order. "My wife is a homeless, delusional vagrant. She does not even have a lawyer. My mother called child services on her last night." "We are fully aware of your mother's fraudulent phone call, Mr. Vance," the second officer interjected, resting his hand casually on his duty belt. "That is exactly why we are here. The state child welfare agents reviewed high-definition security footage of you violently forcing a mother and 2 premature 10-day-old infants out into sub-freezing temperatures. Because of your actions, the Atlanta Police Department is officially opening a criminal investigation into you for severe child endangerment and reckless endangerment of a minor." The silence on the golf course was absolute, heavy and suffocating. Marcus looked wildly around at his friends. The men he had just been desperately trying to impress were now staring at him with unmasked disgust. Preston turned his back, signaling to his caddy to pack up his clubs. In high society, a messy divorce was common, but a highly public criminal investigation involving the physical abuse of premature infants was radioactive. Marcus's social and professional standing evaporated right there on the frozen grass. He was no longer the ruthless, victorious bachelor. He was a pariah. "Do not leave the state, Mr. Vance," the lead officer warned, turning on his heel to walk away. "We will be in touch very soon." Marcus stood paralyzed for exactly 10 seconds before blinding rage took over. He threw his titanium golf club furiously into a nearby sand trap, uncaring as the shaft snapped in half. He stormed off the green, ignoring the stares and whispers of the elite club members, and marched directly to the secluded locker room. His hands were shaking violently as he pulled his phone from his golf bag. He bypassed his mother's number and dialed mine. Back in my penthouse, I was sitting behind my curved mahogany desk, sipping a cup of hot Earl Grey tea while reviewing the finalized mortgage documents for Beatrice's estate. When my private line rang, and Marcus's name appeared on the encrypted monitor, I did not hesitate. I tapped the screen, answering the call on the speakerphone. "You vindictive, crazy witch!" Marcus's voice exploded through the speakers, echoing off the marble walls of my command center. His breathing was heavy, ragged with panic and fury. "I do not know what kind of fake video you showed the cops, but it is not going to work. You think a cheap restraining order scares me? My mother will have those charges dropped by noon. We are going to bury you, Maya. I am going to take my children, and I am going to ensure you end up in a psych ward or a gutter." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. I let the silence stretch out, letting his rapid, terrified breathing fill the airwaves. When I finally spoke, my voice was smooth, cold, and entirely devoid of emotion. "Scream all you want, Marcus," I said, leaning closer to the microphone. "Throw your tantrums, break your golf clubs, call your mother. But you should really save your breath and your energy for the FBI." The line went dead silent. The heavy breathing stopped instantly. What Marcus choked out, his voice suddenly small, stripped of all its previous bravado. "The FBI, Marcus." I repeated, clearly enunciating every syllable. "Because when the federal agents raid your mother's pristine law firm first thing tomorrow morning, they are going to ask exactly where that missing $15 million from the client escrow accounts went. And they are going to ask how you managed to wire it into a Cayman Islands shell company without raising a single red flag." I paused, relishing the absolute terrified silence on the other end of the line. "Oh, and Marcus," I added softly, "do not bother trying to mortgage the Buckhead estate to cover your tracks. My company bought the debt last night. You and your mother are officially my tenants, and your rent is past due." I reached out and tapped the screen, cutting the connection. I sat back in my leather chair, staring at the darkened monitor. Marcus was paralyzed, trapped in a locker room with his entire world collapsing around him, The game was over and I had just declared checkmate. 400 miles south of my Atlanta penthouse, the afternoon sun was beating down on the pristine teak deck of a chartered luxury yacht in Biscayne Bay. Liam, my arrogant brother-in-law, was currently living in a completely alternate reality. He stood at the bow of the massive vessel, dressed in crisp white linen, holding his phone high in the air to capture his own smug, sunburned face for a live stream. Behind him, bikini-clad models and junior investment bankers lounged on white leather sunbeds, sipping vintage champagne that cost more than my first car. Liam was celebrating. His boutique investment bank had been teetering on the absolute edge of catastrophic bankruptcy for 8 agonizing months. He had hidden the firm's toxic debt behind falsified quarterly reports and aggressive arrogance, desperate to maintain his lavish lifestyle. But today, he thought he had won. "Welcome to the winner's circle," Liam boasted to his thousands of online followers, taking a generous sip from his crystal flute. "When you have the right connections and the right pedigree, you do not lose." Sterling Capital just secured a life-saving Tier 1 capital injection from Lumina Holdings. "We are talking hundreds of millions, boys. We just leveled up." He ended the live stream with a victorious whoop, pocketing his phone and turning back to his wealthy, sycophantic friends. He swayed slightly, the heavy alcohol consumption amplifying his usual cruel bravado. He slung an arm around a fellow banker, his voice carrying easily over the upbeat club music pulsing from the yacht's speakers. "It is all about bloodlines and natural instincts." Liam laughed loudly, gesturing with his empty glass. "You look at Marcus's soon-to-be ex-wife. Maya. What a complete joke. She thought she could sit at the adults' table just because Marcus put a ring on her finger. I told him from day one she lacked the genetic pedigree for our world. People like her, they do not have the intellectual capacity for high-level business. They are meant to serve the drinks, not buy the yacht. She is probably crying in a motel right now, completely clueless about how the real world operates." Sitting in the quiet, climate-controlled sanctuary of my penthouse, I watched Liam's live stream replay on my massive wall monitor. My face remained an impenetrable mask of stone. Liam had spent the last 2 years casually dropping racist, classist remarks at every family dinner, hiding his deep-seated bigotry behind the guise of financial superiority. He truly believed his last name, and his skin color granted him a divine right to success, while viewing me as nothing more than a biological and social inferior. He thought Lumina Holdings was a faceless offshore savior. He had absolutely no idea that I was the sole founder, chief executive officer, and majority shareholder of Lumina Holdings. I picked up my secure office phone and dialed my chief financial officer. The connection clicked open instantly. "Cancel Liam's funding," I ordered, my voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "Do not send a warning. Pull the capital injection entirely. Trigger the immediate repayment clause on the bridge loan we extended him last month. I want every single corporate account tied to Sterling Capital frozen within the next 60 seconds. "Consider it done," my director replied efficiently. My director. Back on the yacht, the party was reaching its chaotic peak. Waiters in crisp uniforms circulated with silver platters of beluga caviar and fresh oysters. The lead caterer, a serious man holding a digital payment tablet, approached Liam near the fully stocked bar. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling," the caterer said politely but firmly. "I need to run the card for the final catering and premium beverage tab. The total comes to $20,400. Liam scoffed, waving his hand dismissively, as if the exorbitant amount was mere pocket change. "Put it on the black card," he slurred, pulling the heavy metal corporate credit card from his wallet and tapping it against the screen. The tablet beeped a harsh, negative tone. The screen flashed bright red. "I apologize, sir," the caterer murmured, trying to keep his voice down. "It says declined." Liam's arrogant smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning. "Machine must be broken. Run it again." The caterer tapped the card. Beep, declined. Liam snatched the card back, his face flushing with irritated heat. He pulled out his secondary corporate card, shoving it into the machine. Declined. He tried a personal platinum card. Declined. The music on the yacht seemed to dip perfectly in time with Liam's rising panic. The bankers and models standing nearby stopped talking, their eyes darting toward the escalating scene. Before Liam could yell at the caterer, his smartphone began vibrating violently in his linen pocket. Then it chimed with an email alert. Then another. Then 5 more in rapid, terrifying succession. Liam pulled the phone out, his bloodshot eyes struggling to focus on the screen. The alerts were all from his banking application and his chief operating officer. Lumina Holdings withdraws capital. Accounts frozen by Lumina directive. Immediate repayment clause triggered. Overdraft alert. Sterling capital in default. Liam stared at the glowing screen, all the color draining rapidly from his sunburned face. He looked like a man who had just been shoved out of an airplane without a parachute. He backed up, bumping hard into the bar, gasping for air. Chloe, his wife, and Marcus's equally entitled sister had been sunbathing nearby. She pulled off her designer sunglasses, noticing the sudden, humiliating silence spreading across the yacht. The caterer was now loudly demanding payment, threatening to call the harbor police. Whispers broke out among the elite guests as they pointed at Liam's pale, sweating face. "Liam, what is going on?" Chloe demanded, marching over in her silk cover-up. "Pay the man. People are staring at us. We have nothing," Liam choked out, dropping his phone onto the deck. "Lumina just pulled the funding. They froze everything. We are bankrupt, Chloe. The firm is dead." Chloe stared at him, her mouth dropping open in sheer horror. The social humiliation of a declined credit card at her own luxury party was her absolute worst nightmare. She looked at the mocking faces of the women she called friends, realizing instantly that they were already texting the gossip to the rest of their circle. Chloe burst into hysterical, hyperventilating tears. She pushed past the caterer, fleeing down the teak stairs to the lower deckmaster cabin, locking the door behind her. Sobbing uncontrollably, she grabbed her phone and speed-dialed her mother. Beatrice answered on the first ring. "Mom, you have to help us," Chloe wailed, her voice cracking with sheer panic. "Lumina Holdings just destroyed Liam's firm. They froze all our accounts. The caterers are calling the police. We are totally ruined. We are going to lose the house, the cars, everything." Beatrice, already reeling from Marcus's catastrophic morning, took a sharp, frantic breath. "Calm down, Chloe. Do not panic. I will fix this. I will fix all of it. I will sell the Buckhead mansion." Lumina Holdings made an aggressive commercial offer to buy the estate last week. "I will sign the papers today and use the advance to cover Liam's debts and Marcus's legal fees. We just need that advance cash right now." Inside my penthouse, I watched the live feed from the yacht cut to black. A deep sense of righteous satisfaction washed over me. Exactly 5 minutes later, my secure phone rang again. It was Evelyn Vance, my lead corporate attorney. "Maya," Evelyn said, her voice sharp with professional amusement, "you are not going to believe this. Beatrice is on the other line. She is practically begging to sell the Buckhead estate to Lumina Holdings immediately. She wants to fast-track the paperwork and is demanding a $5 million cash advance by the end of the day." I smiled, turning my chair to look out over the glittering Atlanta skyline. The trap was perfectly set, and the prey had just willingly walked straight into the cage. "Deny the advance," I instructed, my tone absolute and unyielding. "Tell Beatrice that Lumina Holdings requires a formal in-person signing for a transaction of this magnitude. Tell her the sole CEO and founder of Lumina will personally hand her the finalized check tonight at the Winter Charity Gala." I disconnected the call with Evelyn and set the phone face down on the polished mahogany desk. The Winter Charity Gala was exactly 8 hours away. Beatrice and Liam were currently suffocating in their own financial ruin, desperately clinging to the false hope of a corporate bailout. But a cornered animal is always the most dangerous, and Marcus was the most unpredictable of them all. He was locked out of his home, publicly humiliated, under active criminal investigation, and entirely cut off from his immediate cash flow. He would not wait quietly for the gala. He would revert to his only known strategy, brute force and intimidation. I knew exactly where he would go. I instructed my head of security to prepare my armored vehicle in the underground garage. I systematically stripped off my bespoke emerald silk suit and exchanged it for a faded, oversized knit sweater and a pair of worn denim jeans. I pulled my hair back into a messy, exhausted knot. If Marcus wanted to bully the helpless, destitute woman he still foolishly thought he had married, I would give him exactly that illusion. I arrived at the dilapidated apartment complex on the edge of the city, the decoy address Beatrice had triumphantly handed over to the authorities the night before. I walked up the cracked, weather-beaten concrete stairs and unlocked Unit 4B. The room was freezing, deliberately maintained to look abandoned. It contained only a single cheap folding table and 2 rusted metal chairs. I sat down at the table, folded my hands in my lap, and waited for the inevitable. Less than 20 minutes later, the heavy, aggressive sound of footsteps echoed down the decaying hallway. A violent pounding shook the thin wooden door, rattling it against the frame. I did not flinch. I simply called out for them to enter. The door swung open and slammed hard against the drywall. Marcus stood in the threshold, his eyes bloodshot, his designer golf attire wrinkled and smelling faintly of nervous sweat and fear. He looked absolutely nothing like the untouchable, arrogant heir from the country club. Standing right beside him was a man in a sharp, pinstriped Italian suit clutching an expensive leather briefcase. This was Julian Vance, a distant cousin, and the most vicious, unethical bulldog in the Vance family law firm. Julian was infamous in Atlanta for systematically destroying the lives of opposing spouses utilizing blackmail, fabricated evidence, and relentless legal harassment. Julian stepped into the freezing, barren room, his nose crinkling in obvious disgust. He looked at my faded sweater, then at the peeling paint on the walls, and let out a long, patronizing sigh. He adjusted his silk tie as if the mere air in the apartment was contaminating his pristine wardrobe. "Sit down, Maya," Julian commanded, not bothering to introduce himself or ask for permission. He pulled out one of the metal chairs, wiped the seat fastidiously with a linen handkerchief, and sat across from me. Marcus lingered by the door, glaring at me with pure malice. Julian snapped his briefcase open, pulling out a stack of dense, intimidating legal contracts. He tossed a cheap plastic pen onto the folding table. "Let us make this quick and painless, little lady," Julian said, his tone dripping with thick, unbearable condescension. "You are completely out of your depth here. You have 0 income, 0 assets, and you are currently sitting in a freezing hovel trying to play hardball with billionaires. Marcus is willing to be exceptionally generous today. He will drop the breach of contract lawsuit, and he will provide you with a modest monthly stipend. In exchange, you will sign full, irrevocable physical and legal custody of the twins over to him right now. You will also immediately contact the Child Welfare Agency and retract your fabricated police report. You will tell the detectives you were hysterical, suffering from postpartum depression, and entirely hallucinating the events of last night." I looked at the cheap pen, then up at Julian. I did not say a single word. Julian leaned forward, completely mistaking my silence for terrified submission. "Do not play games, sweetheart. You do not have the genetic pedigree or the intellectual stamina to fight a Vance in a courtroom. If you refuse this offer, we will drag your name through the absolute worst mud imaginable. We will paint you as a broke, uneducated gold digger who intentionally endangered her own children just to extort my client. You cannot afford a lawyer. You cannot even afford to turn on the heating in this dump. Sign the papers, drop the CPS charges, and walk away before we decide to put you in a state prison cell instead." Marcus finally spoke up from the doorway, a cruel, vindictive sneer crossing his face. "You heard him, Maya. My mother's bailout money is arriving tonight. Once that Lumina Holdings check clears, we are going to bury you under a mountain of expensive litigation. You are nothing. Sign the damn papers." I slowly reached into the oversized pocket of my faded sweater. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I did not defend my intelligence, my background, or my bank account. I simply pulled out a thick manila envelope and slid it smoothly across the cheap folding table. The heavy package bumped gently against Julian's pen and stopped. Julian frowned, his patronizing smirk faltering as he looked down at the unmarked envelope. He glanced back at Marcus, then back at me before reaching out and breaking the wax seal. He pulled out the first page. It was a highly detailed, highly classified offshore bank ledger. Julian's arrogant smirk vanished instantly. He pulled out the second page with trembling fingers, then the third. The documents were comprehensive, undeniable records of Julian's personal hidden offshore accounts. They detailed every single illegal wire transfer, every massive bribe he had accepted from corrupt family court judges, and every dime he had systematically embezzled from his own firm's corporate clients over the past decade. It was a complete, irrefutable roadmap to his immediate disbarment and a guaranteed 20-year federal prison sentence. Julian's hands began to shake violently. The color drained from his face so fast he looked practically translucent. He swallowed hard, a bead of cold sweat rolling down his temple as his eyes darted across the damning numbers. I leaned forward, resting my elbows gracefully on the folding table. I looked directly into his terrified eyes, letting the mask of the helpless, uneducated housewife fall away completely. My posture shifted, radiating the absolute authority of an apex predator. My voice dropped to a razor-sharp whisper. "I own your firm's debt too," I whispered. "Every single asset, every single liability, and every single dirty secret. If you ever speak to me in that patronizing tone again, Julian, I will send those files to the federal prosecutor before you can even reach the elevator." Julian Vance, the most feared legal bulldog in Atlanta, dropped the papers onto the table, as if they were actively burning his hands. He scrambled backward, his metal chair scraping loudly and frantically against the linoleum floor. He did not say a single word to me. He did not issue another threat. He simply grabbed his empty leather briefcase, snapped it shut, and bolted for the door. Julian Marcus shouted, completely bewildered by the sudden cowardly retreat. "Where the hell are you going? We are not done here. Tell her to sign the papers." Julian did not even pause to look back. He shoved past Marcus, his face pale with absolute terror, and sprinted down the decaying hallway, abandoning his cousin on the spot. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway of the squalid apartment, his eyes wide and vacant as he watched his cutthroat cousin disappear down the concrete stairwell. His jaw hung slack. He looked back at me, his gaze shifting from the peeling paint on the walls to the chilling calm on my face. He finally realized that the freezing decoy apartment was not a sign of my poverty or desperation. It was a carefully constructed trap, and he had walked right into the jaws of it. "Get off my property, Marcus," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the heavy, undeniable weight of a judge's gavel. "And do not ever try to corner me again. If you do, I will ensure the federal agents move up their timeline and arrest you in front of your country club friends." He did not say another word. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own expensive Italian loafers, and fled down the decaying hallway like a frightened child. I sat alone in the freezing room for a moment, a deep, highly satisfying calm washing over my entire body. The arrogant Vance family men were remarkably easy to break once you systematically stripped away their stolen money and their hollow prestige. 2 days later, I was back in my true element. I had happily left the faded oversized sweater and worn denim jeans behind dressing, instead in a tailored ivory cashmere coat, a pristine silk blouse, and dark oversized designer sunglasses. I stepped out of the back of my secure armored SUV and walked purposefully into Petit Trésor, the most exclusive, ridiculously overpriced baby boutique in the elite district of Buckhead. The store was a hushed, fragrant sanctuary of imported French linens, hand-carved mahogany cribs, and silver-plated rattles. It was the exact kind of pretentious establishment Beatrice used to parade through, loudly boasting to the staff about her future grandchildren, while charging exorbitant sums to her law firm's corporate accounts. I was there to arrange a private, comprehensive delivery for the twins' newly expanded multi-million-dollar nursery suite. The boutique manager, recognizing the subtle markers of extreme wealth, was practically bowing as she showed me their newest collection of organic cashmere blankets. I was quietly inspecting a row of silk swaddles when the heavy brass bell above the boutique door chimed frantically. I did not need to turn around to recognize the frantic, heavy, uneven clicking of Chloe's designer heels striking the hardwood floor. She marched straight down the center aisle, her face flushed a blotchy, furious red. Chloe looked entirely unhinged. Her usually perfect salon-styled blowout was a tangled mess, and her eyes were wild with the manic, terrifying desperation of a woman who had just watched her husband's bank accounts freeze, on a luxury yacht in front of her wealthiest friends. Maya Chloe hissed venomously, aggressively closing the distance between us. She reached out and grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging sharply into my cashmere sleeve. I know you are behind this. I know you are the one pulling the strings. You need to stop playing these psychotic games right now. I calmly looked down at her shaking hand, then up at her blotchy face, my expression completely flat and untouchable. She released my arm, instantly stepping back as if she had been burned, but she stubbornly refused to lower her voice. You need to call off your attack dogs, Chloe demanded, her voice rising in pitch and volume, drawing the immediate shocked attention of the store clerks and two other wealthy, pearl-wearing patrons. Liam's investment firm is in a total catastrophic freefall. Marcus is facing actual criminal charges. You are tearing our entire family apart out of sheer petty spite. You need to crawl back to Marcus, apologize to my mother for this ridiculous stunt, and fix this so we can finally have some peace. She was desperately trying to assert her old, tired dominance. For years, Chloe had played the coveted role of the untouchable golden child. She had spent countless holiday dinners loudly mocking my modest upbringing, sneering at my conservative clothes, and constantly reminding everyone that I severely lacked the supposed refinement and genetic pedigree of the Vance bloodline. She fully expected me to cower, to shrink back into the submissive, silent role I had been forced to play, just to survive their highly toxic household. You are absolutely nothing without us, Chloe sneered, stepping closer, her voice echoing harshly off the boutique's vaulted ceilings. You grew up with absolutely nothing. You do not belong in places like this. You do not have the money, the intellect, or the pedigree to fight us. Do you have any idea what you are doing to my mother? She is a highly respected senior partner. You have her so stressed and panicked that she is secretly pawning Grandmother Vance's antique diamond brooches just to keep the electricity on at the estate. She had to sell the historic family silver yesterday, just to pay the landscaping staff because you froze Liam's accounts. You are a destructive, classless parasite. The entire boutique went dead silent. The sales associate stood frozen behind the long marble counter. The other wealthy customers literally stopped breathing, their eyes wide with absolute shock. Chloe, blinded by her own hysterical, unchecked rage, had just publicly broadcasted the Vance family's absolute financial ruin. She had just announced to the wealthiest, most notorious gossips in all of Buckhead that the untouchable elite Beatrice Vance was secretly pawning family heirlooms like a desperate gambling addict just to pay her basic utility bills. Chloe's eyes suddenly went wide as she realized exactly what had just slipped out of her mouth. She clamped a shaking hand over her lips, her face draining of all color, as the sheer magnitude of her social blunder crashed down on her. I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice or defend my background or my wealth. I simply turned away from her trembling, pale face and walked gracefully up to the main marble register. The store manager looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, clearly unsure of how to handle the explosive drama. I will take the silk swaddles, I said smoothly, pulling my solid titanium black card from my designer wallet and placing it on the glass counter. Actually, I will take the entire inventory. Every single crib, every stroller, every piece of designer clothing, and every toy in the showroom and the back stockroom. Box it all up and have it delivered to the Sapphire Tower penthouse by this evening. The manager's jaw practically unhinged. The entire store, madam. That will be well over $200,000. Run the card, I commanded quietly, my tone leaving zero room for debate. The machine chimed a cheerful instant approval. The receipt machine began to whir rapidly, printing out a massive trailing length of paper documenting the unprecedented purchase. I took the incredibly long receipt, folded it neatly in half, and walked slowly back over to where Chloe was standing. She was completely paralyzed, her mouth opening and closing in silent, utterly humiliated shock. I held the receipt out toward her. She did not move to take it, so I let it flutter gently down onto the imported Persian rug right at her feet. You dropped this, I whispered, my voice laced with a lethal, icy calm that made her flinch. Tell Liam good luck with his audit. Chloe was left standing in the middle of the silent boutique, completely speechless, staring blankly down at the floor as her entire world burned to ashes. I walked out of the glass doors of the boutique and stepped smoothly into the rear of my waiting armored vehicle. I did not look back. I did not need to. The total destruction of Chloe Sterling's fragile ego was merely a side note in my broader campaign. The real war was still escalating. By Tuesday morning, the true depth of Beatrice Vance's sheer desperation became entirely clear. Evelyn. My lead corporate attorney swept into my penthouse office holding a silver tablet and a grim expression. She took a seat across from my curved mahogany desk, crossing her legs sharply. Beatrice is not going down quietly, Evelyn stated, tapping the screen of her tablet and sliding it across the polished wood toward me. She has activated her entire social network. She attended the Symphony Board dinner last night and hosted a private brunch at the Piedmont Elite Country Club this morning. She is terrified that the sudden collapse of Liam's firm and Marcus's public lockout will completely ruin her reputation. So she is loudly spinning a new, highly vicious narrative to protect the Vance legacy. I picked up the tablet. It displayed a summary of intercepted communications and transcripts gathered by my private intelligence team. I read the detailed reports, my face remaining a mask of absolute stone. Beatrice was telling everyone in Atlanta's high society that she had personally orchestrated my removal from the family estate. According to her fabricated dramatic tale, she had hired private detectives who uncovered my sordid double life. She was proudly claiming to her wealthy peers that I was a deceitful gold-digging opportunist who had engaged in a long-term affair. The grand finale of her pathetic lie was that my premature twins did not belong to Marcus. She was telling judges, politicians, and socialites that Marcus had demanded a paternity test and that I had fled into the night to hide my ultimate shame. Evelyn watched me closely, expecting a reaction of furious indignation. Maya, this is direct character assassination. We can immediately file a massive defamation lawsuit. We can bury her with a cease and desist order that will gag her permanently. I set the tablet down and leaned back in my leather chair. I did not feel defensive. I did not feel the need to scream or panic. I felt a cold, calculating curiosity taking over my mind. No, I replied softly, folding my hands together. Let her talk. Let her dig her own grave. Maya. She is telling the most powerful people in the state that your children are illegitimate. Evelyn argued, her professional composure cracking slightly. I smiled, a slow, dangerous expression that caused Evelyn to fall perfectly silent. You have to analyze the psychology of a cornered narcissist, Evelyn. Liars rarely invent their lies out of thin air. They pull from their own subconscious. They project their own deepest, darkest fears onto their enemies. Beatrice is currently fighting a multi-front financial war. Why would she specifically choose to invent a lie about a secret affair and illegitimate children? It is too specific. It is too detailed. It is a massive psychological projection. I turned my attention to the secure intercom on my desk and pressed the silver button. Bring Thorne in here immediately. Within 60 seconds, the heavy mahogany doors to my office opened. Thorne, the stoic, impeccably dressed head of my private intelligence and security firm, stepped into the room. He stood at attention, waiting for my directive. Thorne, I need a rush order, I commanded, my voice crisp and authoritative. Beatrice Vance is spreading rumors that my twins do not belong to Marcus. I want to shut this down with irrefutable science, but I want to go much deeper. When Lumina Holdings acquired the debt on the Buckhead estate, we also acquired everything Marcus abandoned in his frantic exit. Access his bathroom, take his razor, his hairbrushes, and the old family medical records stored in the main office safe. Run a discreet, highly expedited DNA sequence. Cross-reference his genetic markers against my twins. Thorne nodded once, his face impassive. Understood, ma'am. I will have the medical team run the samples immediately. Do you want the sequence strictly limited to paternity? I thought about Beatrice's frantic, specific lies at the country club. I thought about Chloe screaming in the boutique about her pristine genetic pedigree and pure Vance bloodlines. No, I instructed quietly. Run a complete, comprehensive genetic profile on the entire Vance family structure. Use the medical files Beatrice left behind in the estate. Map every single connection. If Beatrice is projecting a secret about illegitimate children, I want to know exactly where that secret is buried. Thorne bowed his head and quickly exited the room. For the next 48 hours, I continued to systematically dismantle the Vance family's financial empire. I finalized the foreclosure paperwork on Sterling Capital, permanently sealing Liam's ruin. I ignored a dozen frantic, threatening voicemails from Marcus. I simply focused on the work, letting the silence drive them deeper into their own paranoid madness. On Thursday evening, the heavy doors to my office opened once again. Thorne stepped inside, holding a thick, securely sealed manila envelope. His usual stoic expression was replaced by a look of profound, quiet disbelief. He walked up to my desk and placed the heavy envelope directly in front of me. "You were right to run the comprehensive sweep, ma'am," Thorne said, keeping his voice strictly professional. "We expedited the processing through our private offshore lab. The results are absolute and legally binding." I picked up the envelope and broke the heavy wax seal. I pulled out the first stack of lab reports, my eyes scanning the highlighted sections. "The twins are 100% Marcus's biological children," Thorne confirmed, confirming what I already knew. "There is zero genetic deviation." I set that report aside and pulled out the second, much thicker stack of heavily annotated medical documents. "But we found something else." Thorne continued, his voice dropping slightly as he delivered the ultimate fatal blow. "The anomaly did not come from your generation. It came from hers. We cross-referenced the family medical profiles. Chloe Sterling is not Marcus's full sister. She does not share the same paternal genetic markers. Beatrice Vance had a long-term, highly secretive affair 30 years ago. Chloe is the biological product of that affair." I stared down at the glowing, undeniable proof printed on the pages before me. Beatrice, the arrogant, ruthless matriarch who constantly preached about the supremacy of the Vance bloodline, was a massive, utter fraud. Chloe, the golden child who believed she was genetically superior to the rest of the world, was completely illegitimate. Beatrice had built an entire dynasty of wealth and elitism on a foundation of infidelity and lies, and she had just handed me the sledgehammer to destroy it all. I did not say a word. I carefully slid the incredibly damning lab reports back into the thick manila envelope. I walked over to the biometric safe hidden behind a painting on my office wall. I pressed my thumb to the scanner, heard the heavy steel bolts retract, and placed the envelope inside. I locked the safe, securing the absolute ruin of Beatrice Vance until the perfect moment. The morning of the Winter Charity Gala arrived with a razor-sharp, freezing clarity over the Atlanta skyline. Inside the penthouse of the Sapphire Tower, the atmosphere was a calculated symphony of high-end luxury and intense preparation. The vast master suite had been transformed into a private backstage sanctuary, humming with the quiet, focused energy of a top-tier glam squad flown in directly from New York and Paris. A celebrity makeup artist was meticulously blending imported foundations under daylight-mimicking vanity bulbs, while a master hairstylist pinned intricate, flawless waves into place. Two tailors stood by in white gloves, steaming a custom-designed gown draped over a mannequin. I sat perfectly still in the plush leather chair, a silent oasis of calm amidst the elite chaos. They treated me not just like a client, but like royalty, preparing for an inevitable coronation. Every detail of my appearance was being curated with absolute weaponized precision. For years, the Vance family had used fashion and social presentation as a tool of psychological warfare, forcing me to wear muted colors and off-the-rack designs to ensure I never outshone Chloe or Beatrice at public functions. Marcus used to look at my simple cocktail dresses with an engineered expression of pity, whispering that I should be grateful he even allowed a girl from my background to stand on his arm at these prestigious events. They wanted me small, invisible, and permanently apologetic for my existence. But tonight the narrative was entirely mine to control. A sharp chime broke the hum of the hairdryer. My personal smartphone, sitting face up on the marble vanity, vibrated against the stone. The screen illuminated with a message from a number I had deliberately left unblocked for this exact day. It was Beatrice. The message exploded onto the screen with the unhinged venom of a woman fiercely desperate to protect her fading social dominance. Attached to the text was a high-resolution photograph of Beatrice standing in front of the grand mirror of her Buckhead estate, posing in an extraordinarily lavish deep emerald velvet gown, dripping with hand-stitched Swarovski crystals. Her posture was stiff, her smile forced, hiding the immense panic of a woman who had spent the last 48 hours secretly pawning her family heirlooms just to keep the lights running in that very room. Below the photograph, her text message read, "Too bad you are stuck in a homeless shelter tonight, Maya. The adults are doing real business at the gala. Marcus and Chloe will be by my side representing the Vance legacy as we always do. Enjoy your cheap pizza in the dark." I looked at the text message, a cold, dry smile touching my lips. I did not get defensive. I did not feel a sudden surge of adrenaline or anger. Instead, I felt a deep, profound sense of pity for the sheer, tragic predictability of Beatrice Vance. This text message was the absolute culmination of her lifelong obsession with material wealth and social dominance. To Beatrice, a person's entire human worth was measured strictly by the price tag of their gown, the size of their diamond, and the exclusivity of the charity gala they attended. She truly believed that by sending a picture of an expensive dress, she could somehow re-establish her absolute authority and make me feel like the submissive, terrified outsider I used to be. She was completely, beautifully oblivious. She had no idea that her precious son Marcus was a radioactive pariah under active criminal investigation for child endangerment. She had no idea that her golden child daughter Chloe was currently weeping in a locked room after publicly humiliating the family name at a Buckhead boutique. Most importantly, she had absolutely no idea that the massive $5 million cash advance she was desperately expecting to receive at the gala tonight was entirely controlled by me. She thought she was walking into a room full of her admiring peers to secure a bailout. In reality, she was walking straight onto a public stage where I was about to execute checkmate. I calmly turned my phone face down on the marble vanity, completely dismissing the message. I caught the eye of my personal luxury concierge and chief assistant Elena, who was standing quietly by the velvet-draped entrance of the wardrobe suite. "Elena?" I said, my voice smooth, even, and entirely devoid of emotion. "Open the vault." Elena nodded immediately, her expression sharpening with intense professional anticipation. She strode over to the master wall, bypassing the standard jewelry cases, and approached a hidden biometric steel panel seamlessly embedded into the custom mahogany woodwork. She pressed her palm against the glass scanner. The mechanism gave a deep hydraulic hum as the heavy steel lock disengaged. The panel slid back to reveal a specialized midnight blue velvet vault. Resting inside, illuminated by a single spotlight, was a breathtaking museum-quality vintage diamond necklace. It was a masterpiece of classic European design featuring over 100 carats of perfectly cut, flawless pear-shaped diamonds cascading down into a massive central pigeon blood ruby surrounded by a halo of brilliant white stones. The piece radiated a blinding, hypnotic brilliance that instantly caused the entire glam squad to stop working. The makeup artist gasped, and the tailors lowered their steamers in absolute awe. This was not just an expensive piece of jewelry. This was a direct, lethal historical weapon. Exactly a decade ago, Beatrice Vance had traveled to a prestigious International Christie's auction in London, entirely determined to purchase this exact vintage necklace. It was the ultimate status symbol, a piece she intended to use to establish her absolute dominance over the entire Atlanta elite. She had bragged about it for months ahead of time, arrogantly telling her social circle that the necklace was practically hers. But during the final minutes of the bidding war, a mysterious, anonymous offshore trust had aggressively outbid her, driving the price up to a staggering $2 million and snatching the prize straight out of her hands. Beatrice had been utterly humiliated on an international stage, and she had coveted, obsessed, and wept over that lost necklace for 10 long years, calling it the one supreme luxury that got away. She had absolutely no idea that the anonymous offshore trust that had outbid her a decade ago was completely owned by my private investment firm. Elena put on a pair of white silk gloves, carefully lifted the heavy, brilliant masterpiece from its velvet cushion, and stepped up behind my chair. The tailors held my custom gown as Elena gently lowered the cold, brilliant weight of the $2 million necklace onto my collarbone. The diamonds caught the bright vanity lights, casting a blinding, fractured glow across my face. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The faded sweater was gone. The submissive victim of the Vance family was dead. Standing before the mirror was the undisputed chief executive officer of Lumina Holdings, wearing the exact symbol of absolute wealth and social dominance that Beatrice Vance had spent a decade desperately craving. "Let us go to the gala," I said softly, standing up as the tailors adjusted the train of my gown. "It is time to hand Beatrice her check." The Piedmont Elite Country Club had been transformed into a glittering, heavily fortified palace of winter opulence. Valets in crisp white coats scrambled to open the heavy doors of imported luxury sedans, while a sea of flashing camera bulbs illuminated the sprawling, velvet-roped red carpet. This was the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta high society, a carefully curated sanctuary where the wealthy gathered to flaunt their excess under the incredibly thin guise of seasonal charity. Beatrice Vance stepped out of her chauffeured town car, flanked by the rapidly crumbling remnants of her dynasty. She wore the deep emerald velvet gown from her cruel text message, the heavy crystal-lined fabric dragging slightly against the freezing concrete. Her smile was incredibly tight, an engineered display of absolute supreme confidence designed to hide the crushing reality of her financial suffocation. She stood tall, posing for the blinding cameras, desperately trying to project an image of untouchable power while secretly calculating exactly how many hours she had left before the bank foreclosed on her entire life. Beside her, Marcus looked physically ill. His bespoke tuxedo hung awkwardly on his frame, his face pale and slick with a thin layer of nervous sweat despite the biting winter wind. His eyes constantly darted toward the shadows at the edge of the property, fully terrified that federal agents or local police detectives were waiting to drag him away in handcuffs. He was a broken man trying to play the role of an elite prince, and the strain was visibly tearing him apart. Chloe and Liam trailed just steps behind the matriarch. They clung to each other with a desperate, highly toxic energy. Liam wore a custom-tailored midnight blue tuxedo, his jaw locked in a rigid, angry line. He had spent the entire afternoon frantically calling every shadow lender and offshore contact in his network, completely unable to bypass the absolute freeze Lumina Holdings had placed on his life. He was drowning in toxic debt, completely bankrupt, and facing a total corporate collapse. Yet as soon as the paparazzi turned their heavy lenses toward him, Liam shoved his hands into his pockets, lifted his chin, and projected the smug, aggressive aura of a triumphant billionaire. A prominent society reporter thrust a microphone toward the family, eager for a soundbite from the notorious Vance clan. Beatrice immediately stepped into the spotlight, pushing Marcus slightly to the side to ensure she commanded the frame. "We are expecting a truly phenomenal evening for the Children's Fund," Beatrice announced, her voice projecting a smooth, practiced elegance that hid her absolute panic. "The Vance family is incredibly proud to lead the philanthropic charge in Atlanta. In fact, we are finalizing a massive multi-million-dollar transaction tonight with Lumina Holdings that will cement our charitable legacy for generations to come." She practically beamed, completely addicted to the taste of her own fabricated reality. She actually believed she was walking into that ballroom to collect a bailout. The reporter nodded eagerly, turning the microphone toward her son-in-law. "And Sterling Capital, Mr. Sterling word on Wall Street, is that you are making some highly aggressive moves this quarter to secure your market position." Liam puffed out his chest, his sunburned face flushing with a potent mix of premium alcohol and pure, unadulterated hubris. He leaned aggressively into the microphone, flashing a predatory, terrifyingly arrogant grin. "Sterling Capital is doing exactly what we always do," Liam boasted smoothly, completely oblivious to his own impending doom. "We separate the wheat from the chaff. You absolutely must maintain high standards in a city like this. Quite frankly, we are fully focused on cleaning up the streets. You look at the business sector lately, and they are letting just anyone sit at the adult table. There is entirely too much riffraff, Too many people who severely lack the right genetic makeup and proper pedigree trying to play in our sandbox. We are here to aggressively ensure that the wealth stays exactly where it belongs. He gave a short, cruel laugh, adjusting his expensive silk lapel. The veiled, highly racist dog whistle was unmistakable, a disgusting testament to his absolute moral bankruptcy. He stood on the edge of total financial annihilation, yet he still felt overwhelmingly superior to everyone outside of his gated community. Chloe nodded enthusiastically beside him, linking her arm tightly through his, fully endorsing his vile, exclusionary rhetoric. Beatrice shot Liam a sharp warning glance, not because she disagreed with his abhorrent worldview, but because she strictly preferred her bigotry kept safely behind closed country club doors. She turned back to the flashing cameras, ready to continue her grand delusion of prosperity. Before the reporter could ask another fawning question, a sudden deep rumble shook the pavement. The flashing bulbs of the paparazzi abruptly stopped. The journalists, photographers, and elite guests turned their heads in absolute unison, entirely distracted from the Vance family's desperate performance. Rolling smoothly up the long, circular driveway was a massive, imposing motorcade of jet-black, heavily armored SUVs. The vehicles moved with precise military coordination, flanking a stunning flagship Maybach with deep tinted windows. The sheer scale and aggressive luxury of the arrival commanded absolute silence across the crowded red carpet. Beatrice's fake smile faltered instantly. Marcus took a rapid, nervous step backward, his hands trembling at his sides. Liam scoffed loudly, clearly irritated that his moment in the spotlight had been so abruptly stolen. "Who the hell does this guy think he is?" Liam muttered, glaring at the sleek black vehicles with open hostility. Probably some newly rich, uneducated tech nerd who does not know how to conduct himself in polite society. The motorcade came to a smooth halt directly in front of the main entrance. 6 massive security personnel in dark suits immediately exited the SUVs, securing the perimeter with flawless, silent efficiency. The head of security walked directly to the rear door of the Maybach and pulled it open. The paparazzi, sensing a truly monumental arrival, completely abandoned the Vance family. The reporters shoved aggressively past Beatrice, nearly knocking Chloe off her designer heels, sprinting toward the Maybach to capture the moment. Beatrice gasped in genuine outrage, shouting at the photographers to return, but she was entirely ignored. She was completely irrelevant. I stepped out of the vehicle and set my silver stiletto onto the plush red carpet. The entire courtyard erupted into a blinding, chaotic storm of camera flashes and screaming reporters. I stood tall, the crisp winter wind catching the flowing train of my tailored ivory cashmere gown. I looked like absolute royalty, radiating an untouchable lethal power that instantly silenced the murmuring crowd. And resting perfectly against my collarbone, catching every single flash of light and throwing a brilliant, blinding fire across the courtyard, was the $2 million vintage diamond and ruby necklace. Beatrice Vance stared at my throat. Her jaw dropped open. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably at her sides. The ultimate prize she had craved for a decade was currently resting on the neck of the woman she had tried to destroy. I walked past the paralyzed Vance family, my heels clicking rhythmically against the icy pavement. The cameras continued to flash wildly, capturing every single micro-expression of Beatrice's absolute soul-crushing devastation. I glided gracefully through the towering brass and glass doors of the Piedmont Elite Country Club, leaving the bitter winter chill behind and entering the warm, fragrant atmosphere of the grand ballroom. The vaulted ceilings were draped in heavy winter silks, and a live string quartet played softly from a raised mahogany stage. As I descended the grand marble staircase into the main reception area, the entire room seemed to collectively hold its breath. Waiters paused with silver trays of champagne. Wealthy socialites stopped mid-sentence, their crystal glasses hovering near their lips. My tailored ivory cashmere gown and the blinding $2 million ruby and diamond necklace demanded absolute, unyielding attention. I was a walking, breathing testament to ultimate power, and everyone in the room instinctively knew it. It took Beatrice exactly 45 seconds to shake off her paralysis on the red carpet and chase me inside. I was standing near a towering, intricately carved ice sculpture, casually accepting a flute of sparkling water from a silent waiter, when the harsh, frantic clicking of her heels echoed aggressively across the marble floor. Beatrice pushed her way violently through a cluster of elite donors. Her face, usually powdered and perfectly composed, was flushed a blotchy, furious purple. The absolute shock of seeing me wearing the one jewel she had coveted for 10 agonizing years had completely broken her psychological dam. She lunged toward a burly earpiece-wearing security guard stationed near the ballroom entrance, grabbing him tightly by his uniform sleeve and physically dragging him toward me. "Throw this gutter rat out!" Beatrice screamed at the absolute top of her lungs, completely abandoning decades of refined country club etiquette. Her voice cracked, echoing harshly off the vaulted ceilings and silencing the string quartet entirely. The music died in a discordant screech of violin strings. She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my face, her eyes wide with unhinged mania. "She does not have a ticket. She is a trespasser. Remove her immediately." The entire ballroom froze in absolute shock. Hundreds of wealthy eyes turned toward the spectacle. Before the bewildered security guard could even process the hysterical command, Marcus emerged from the crowd. He looked frantic, completely terrified of the public exposure his mother was causing. He marched directly up to me, his jaw clenched, and aggressively seized my left arm. His grip was entirely too tight, a harsh, bruising reminder of the physical and emotional control he had exerted over me for years. He tried to physically pull me toward the service exit, his fingers digging sharply into my cashmere sleeve. "Maya, what is wrong with you, Marcus?" hissed, his voice dropping into a violent, panicked whisper, meant only for my ears. "You are completely humiliating me. You are ruining my family's reputation in front of the most important people in Atlanta. You need to leave right now quietly before I have the police arrest you for trespassing and theft. Where did you even steal that necklace? You are pathetic. Get out before I make this worse for you." I looked down at his hand gripping my arm. I did not pull away. I did not flinch. I simply leveled my gaze at his terrified, sweating face, my eyes radiating absolute freezing disdain. He was trying to assert the same tired dominance he had used when I lived in his shadow, completely blind to the fact that I now held his entire future in the palm of my hand. "Let go of me, Marcus," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal weight that made his eyes widen. The security guard, feeling suddenly emboldened by Marcus's physical aggression and Beatrice's continuous hysterical screaming, finally stepped forward. He reached out his thick, heavily calloused hands, preparing to forcibly grab my shoulders and physically drag me out of the ballroom in front of the entire Atlanta elite. "Stop exactly right there," a loud, commanding voice boomed across the silent room, carrying the unquestionable authority of a man entirely in charge. Mr. Sterling, the impeccably dressed general manager of the Piedmont Elite Country Club, sprinted across the polished marble floor, his face pale with absolute horror. He shoved his way aggressively past Marcus and Beatrice, placing his own body directly between me and the reaching security guard. He held up his hands, completely shielding me from the guard's advance. "You are fired!" the general manager barked at the stunned security guard, pointing sharply toward the staff exit. "Hand in your badge and get off this property immediately. Do not ever return." The guard stammered, his arms dropping to his sides as he quickly retreated into the shadows of the hallway, completely bewildered by the sudden termination. Beatrice gasped in genuine outrage, stepping forward to assert her social dominance over the staff. "What is the exact meaning of this?" Beatrice demanded, her voice shrill with indignation and deeply rooted entitlement. "I ordered that man to remove this classless trespasser. I am Beatrice Vance. I pay your salary. I demand that you throw her out right this second." The general manager slowly straightened his suit jacket, taking a deep, calming breath. He did not cower. He did not apologize. He did not bow to her prestigious family name. He looked Beatrice directly in the eyes with absolute stone-cold professional clarity. "Mrs. Vance," the general manager stated, his voice ringing out clearly for the entire audience of breathless, silent socialites to hear. "You cannot throw out the majority shareholder of this establishment. The room fell into a dead, stunned silence. The sheer impossible magnitude of the general manager's statement echoed off the vaulted silk-draped ceilings, hanging over the crowd like a suspended blade. The string quartet remained completely frozen. The servers stood paralyzed like marble statues. Hundreds of the wealthiest, most powerful socialites in Atlanta stopped breathing entirely, their eyes darting frantically between the pale, sweating face of Marcus Vance and my perfectly calm, untouchable expression. Beatrice Vance physically staggered backward. The heavy emerald velvet of her gown caught on the heel of her shoe and she nearly toppled over. Her jaw worked soundlessly, opening and closing as her brain completely short-circuited, entirely unable to process the factual reality being presented to her. She looked at the general manager, then at me, then back to the general manager, her eyes wide with a frantic, unhinged terror. "That is an absolute lie," Beatrice stammered, her voice suddenly thin and reedy, stripped of all its usual booming authority. She pointed a shaking, jewel-encrusted finger at the general manager. "You are making a sick, disgusting joke. That woman is a nobody. She is a classless parasite who lived in my guest house. She does not own a single brick of this country club. I assure you, Mrs. Vance, it is an undeniable legal fact." The general manager replied, his tone remaining perfectly level and entirely unbothered by her hysterical outburst. Lumina Holdings acquired the controlling stake in the Piedmont Elite Country Club property group exactly 4 days ago. Madam Maya is the sole acting chief executive. She literally owns the ground you are currently standing on. Therefore, I strongly suggest you lower your voice and remember your manners, or I will gladly have security escort your entire family to the street. Chloe let out a high, strangled gasp, clapping both hands over her mouth as the horrifying truth finally pierced through her thick layer of denial. Liam took a sharp step away from his wife, his face draining of all color. His eyes locked onto me, and I could literally see the exact moment his brain connected the sudden catastrophic destruction of his Wall Street investment firm to the woman standing gracefully in front of him. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a live landmine. Marcus remained completely paralyzed. His hand, which had been gripping my arm just moments before, now hung limply at his side. He stared at the blinding $2 million vintage ruby necklace resting against my collarbone, his breathing shallow and rapid. He was slowly, painfully realizing that the freezing decoy apartment, the vanished bank accounts, and the total lockout from his own corporate building were all orchestrated by the woman he had relentlessly abused and discarded. Beatrice, however, simply could not accept defeat. Her entire psychological foundation was built on absolute social dominance and material superiority. Faced with the reality of my power, her mind violently rejected the information. She forcibly reassembled her features into a mask of rigid, terrifying denial. She aggressively smoothed the front of her emerald gown and turned her back to me entirely. "I will not entertain this pathetic, delusional charade for another second," Beatrice announced loudly, aggressively projecting her voice to the staring crowd, desperately trying to rewrite the narrative in real time. "We have actual, highly important business to attend to. The real adults in the room have a legacy to secure. Come along, Marcus. We are not wasting our evening on the hired help." She grabbed Marcus by the wrist and yanked him forward, physically pulling her trembling son through the sea of silent, staring guests. She was fleeing, but she masked her retreat as a strategic pivot. She dragged her family directly toward the front of the grand mahogany stage at the far end of the ballroom, completely determined to secure her financial salvation and pretend the last 5 minutes had never occurred. At that exact moment, the heavy velvet curtains on the stage parted. The charity gala host, a prominent local politician known for his booming voice and theatrical delivery, stepped up to the gold-plated microphone stand. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly, signaling the beginning of the night's main event. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and cherished benefactors," the host began, his voice echoing clearly through the pristine sound system. "We are gathered here tonight to celebrate generosity, vision, and the enduring strength of Atlanta's elite community. But tonight is particularly special. Over the past few weeks, our local market has faced unprecedented turbulence. Historic estates' corporate pillars and vital community assets were placed in severe jeopardy. Beatrice shoved her way to the absolute front of the crowd, planting herself directly at the base of the stage. She elbowed a prominent city councilwoman out of the way, aggressively claiming the best vantage point. She smoothed her hair and practiced her most charming, manipulative Southern belle smile. In her mind, she was fully expecting to greet an old, wealthy, traditional white billionaire. She was calculating exactly how to flatter him, how to use her fading social prestige to woo him, and how to manipulate him into handing her a massive multi-million-dollar bailout check to save the Vance estate from foreclosure. She pulled Marcus firmly to her side, hissing at him to stand up straight and prepare to shake the hand of their savior. But a true savior emerged from the shadows. The host continued, his voice rising in dramatic crescendo. A visionary entity stepped forward, acquiring the distressed debt, stabilizing our elite infrastructure, and bringing a new, undeniable era of power to this great city. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my absolute supreme honor to introduce the primary benefactor of tonight's gala, the outright savior of Atlanta's real estate, and the CEO of Lumina Holdings. Beatrice leaned forward eagerly, her eyes locked onto the heavy velvet curtains at the back of the empty stage, her smile practically blinding in its desperation. She waited for the old man to step through the fabric. She waited for her salvation. The stage curtains did not move. Instead, the massive, blindingly bright overhead spotlight abruptly swung away from the mahogany stage. The thick beam of pure white light swept rapidly across the dark, crowded ballroom, illuminating the shocked faces of the elite guests before snapping to a sudden, dramatic halt. The spotlight landed directly, squarely, and flawlessly on me. I was standing perfectly still at the base of the grand marble staircase, the ivory cashmere of my gown glowing like liquid silver in the intense beam of light. The $2 million vintage diamond and ruby necklace caught the spotlight, instantly exploding into a terrifying, radiant fire of blinding luxury. I looked across the vast room, my eyes locking directly onto Beatrice Vance's completely destroyed face. I smiled. It was a slow, lethal, devastating smirk that promised absolute, unyielding ruin. Elena, standing silently in the shadows just outside the spotlight, stepped forward and respectfully handed me a sleek, silver wireless microphone. I wrapped my fingers around the cool metal and took my very first graceful step up the grand marble staircase. Standing at the front of the stage, surrounded by hundreds of staring peers, Marcus Vance completely let go. His hand went entirely slack. The heavy crystal champagne glass he had been clutching slipped through his trembling fingers. It hit the polished marble floor, shattering loudly, sending 1,000 sharp, glittering fragments exploding into the dead, breathless silence of the room. The sharp, violent crack of crystal shattering against the polished marble floor echoed like a gunshot through the suffocating silence of the grand ballroom. The sound severed the last remaining thread of Marcus Vance's fabricated reality. He dropped to his knees right there at the base of the grand staircase, his expensive tailored tuxedo pooling around him, completely ignoring the shards of glass cutting into his fabric. He stared up at me with wide, hollow eyes, a man who had finally realized he was entirely powerless. I did not pause to look at him. My silver stilettos continued their steady, rhythmic ascent up the plush, carpeted steps of the mahogany stage. The spotlight tracked my every movement, casting a brilliant, blinding aura around my ivory cashmere gown. The $2 million vintage ruby necklace rested heavily against my collarbone, radiating a fiery, undeniable authority. The charity gala host, realizing the monumental shift in power occurring right in front of him, quickly stepped aside and gestured respectfully toward the podium. I stepped behind the polished wood and adjusted the microphone. The quiet screech of audio feedback swept over the crowd, ensuring I commanded the absolute, undivided attention of every single billionaire, socialite, and media tycoon in Atlanta. Directly below me, standing at the absolute front of the stage where she had aggressively pushed her way forward just moments prior, Beatrice Vance looked physically ill. The triumphant, manipulative smile she had prepared for her imaginary savior had melted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Her emerald velvet gown suddenly looked heavy and suffocating. Her hands gripped the edge of the stage, her knuckles white as she stared up at the woman she had spent a decade trying to destroy. "Good evening, Atlanta," I said, my voice projecting smoothly and flawlessly through the towering speakers. "It is a genuine privilege to stand before the true architects of this city. We are gathered here to celebrate philanthropy, community, and the enduring strength of our local economy. However, true strength requires absolute transparency, and unfortunately, this evening has been built on a foundation of desperate, pathetic lies." The entire ballroom erupted into a chorus of shocked murmurs. High society reporters frantically raised their cameras. Chloe Vance, standing near the back with Liam, let out a loud, strangled sob. Liam simply stared at the floor, his face flushed a sickly shade of gray, fully understanding the magnitude of the financial slaughter about to unfold. I looked directly down into Beatrice's frantic, wide eyes. "My mother-in-law told you all I was a failure," I said to the crowd of billionaires, my tone perfectly even, slicing through the heavy air with surgical precision. "She told you Lumina Holdings was stepping in tonight to buy her estate. She told you we were finalizing a massive multi-million-dollar transaction that would cement the Vance family legacy for generations to come. But she lied." Beatrice opened her mouth to scream, to object, to order me off the stage, but her vocal cords completely failed her. She was entirely paralyzed by the sheer crushing weight of public exposure. "The Vance dynasty is a complete illusion," I continued, my voice commanding the absolute silence of the room. "For years, Beatrice Vance has paraded around this city, demanding your respect and taking your investments while secretly bleeding her own empire dry. She mortgaged her properties to the brink of collapse. Her son-in-law, Liam Sterling, leveraged his entire firm on toxic offshore debt and lost everything. Her son Marcus sat silently while the family bank accounts were drained to fund an extravagant lifestyle they could not actually afford." The whispers in the crowd grew louder, transforming into audible gasps of genuine shock. Powerful investors who had done business with the Vance family began exchanging furious, alarmed glances. The elite facade Beatrice had maintained for 40 years was being violently dismantled piece by piece. "She threw me out of her house with nothing," I told the captivated audience, my gaze never leaving Beatrice's trembling face. "She called me a parasite. She called me a gutter rat. She told me I lacked the proper pedigree to sit at her table." She was entirely blind to the fact that while she was busy polishing her fake silver and pretending to be royalty, I was quietly building the very institution that would inevitably swallow her whole. Lumina Holdings was not created overnight. It was forged in the shadows, acquiring the exact distressed, toxic debt that families like the Vances were desperately trying to hide from the public. "Maya, stop!" Beatrice finally managed to shriek, her voice cracking in a high, hysterical pitch. She slammed her hands against the stage. "You are lying. You are a vindictive, lying child making up stories to embarrass me. Do not listen to her. She is nothing." I smiled. It was a cold, absolute expression of total victory. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers once. Instantly, the massive state-of-the-art digital screen suspended behind the stage roared to life. The brilliant white light of the projector bathed the entire room. I stepped aside, allowing the hundreds of elite guests a clear, unobstructed view of the documents currently displayed on the screen. They were high-resolution scans of official banking records. Every single shadow loan, every offshore transfer, every default notice the Vance family had accrued over the last 5 years was laid bare. Red ink covered the digital pages, and stamped across every single document in bold, undeniable black ink was the watermark of Lumina Holdings as the sole acquiring entity. "Lumina isn't buying your mansion, Beatrice," I announced, my voice echoing like a gavel striking wood. "We bought your defaulted mortgage. I am foreclosing on your estate tonight. You have 24 hours to vacate my property." The sharp, violent crack of Marcus's crystal champagne glass, shattering against the polished marble floor, acted as a starting gun for Liam Sterling. The shock that had temporarily paralyzed the room instantly boiled over inside him, morphing into a blind, uncontrollable, and profoundly arrogant rage. The sheer undeniable reality of his impending ruin was entirely too much for his fragile ego to process. He violently shoved his weeping wife Chloe aside with such force that she stumbled into a passing waiter, sending a silver tray of caviar crashing to the floor. Liam marched aggressively toward the grand mahogany stage. His expensive midnight blue tuxedo suddenly looked restrictive, his sunburned face contorting into a mask of pure, unfiltered hostility. He stomped heavily up the carpeted stairs, his fists clenched at his sides, completely ignoring the alarmed murmurs erupting from the sea of wealthy onlookers. He did not care about optics anymore. He did not care about the flashing cameras, the influential politicians standing just feet away, or the delicate country club etiquette his mother-in-law prized above all else. The carefully constructed illusion of his absolute superiority had been punctured, and he was determined to violently reassert his dominance over a woman he fundamentally viewed as beneath him. He charged directly at me, stopping mere inches from my face. I could smell the premium bourbon on his breath, mixed with the sour metallic stench of sheer panic. He reached out and violently snatched the silver microphone from my hand, his grip white-knuckled and shaking with unhinged fury. "You listen to me, you pathetic, delusional fraud!" Liam screamed into the microphone, his voice blasted through the towering ballroom speakers, echoing with a harsh, grating distortion that made several guests physically recoil. "You think you can waltz into our sanctuary wearing borrowed jewels and announce that you own us? You are nothing. You are a lucky diversity hire who manipulated a broken system." The room collectively gasped. A heavy, suffocating tension immediately settled over the ballroom. Wealthy socialites exchanged horrified, wide-eyed glances. Beatrice Vance, still standing paralyzed at the base of the stage, buried her face in her hands, fully realizing that her son-in-law was rapidly destroying whatever tiny shred of social credibility their family had left. But Liam was completely detached from reality, fully intoxicated by his own vile bigotry and his desperate need to maintain his fabricated status. He paced the stage like a caged animal, gesturing wildly toward me with his free hand, ensuring the entire elite society bore witness to his true, unfiltered nature. "You do not belong here," he continued to roar, his words dripping with a toxic classist poison that exposed the darkest, most wretched corners of his morality. "People like you do not sit at the adult table. You scrub the tables. You serve the drinks. You are a quota filler and affirmative action charity case who somehow scraped together enough pennies to buy a defaulted mortgage. Well, let me tell you exactly how the real world works. I come from generational wealth. I have a trust fund that could bury you and your pathetic little shell company before breakfast. I will tie you up in endless litigation for the next 50 years. I will crush you until you are begging for a job cleaning the toilets in my corporate building." He stood chest to chest with me, his eyes wide and manic, his chest heaving as he breathed heavily into the microphone. He genuinely believed his words carried weight. He fully expected me to shrink, to cower, to apologize for stepping out of line and daring to challenge the established hierarchy of Atlanta's elite. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at him with an expression of profound, absolute boredom. His racist, elitist tirade was exactly what I had anticipated. He was entirely predictable, a textbook narcissist relying on archaic intimidation tactics because his actual intellect was completely bankrupt. "Are you quite finished, Liam?" I asked. I did not need the microphone. My voice, calm and icy, carried perfectly over his heavy breathing. He sneered, raising the microphone again, fully prepared to unleash another wave of abhorrent insults. I did not give him the chance. I reached into the hidden pocket of my ivory cashmere gown and retrieved my sleek black smartphone. I held it up the screen, glowing brightly in the dim stage lighting. With a single, deliberate motion, I pressed a button on the screen. I had seamlessly synced my device to the Piedmont Elite Country Club's pristine, state-of-the-art audio system the moment I stepped onto the property. Instantly, Liam's own voice echoed through the massive ballroom speakers. But this recording was not a loud, aggressive scream. It was a slick, arrogant, highly confidential whisper captured perfectly during a private dinner meeting just 3 weeks prior. The audio played clearly, bouncing off the silk-draped ceilings with devastating clarity. "Look, you just shift the equity from the Harper account into the offshore holding firm." The recorded voice of Liam instructed smoothly, followed by the distinct clinking of a whiskey glass. "No, Harper will never notice. The guy is 80 years old and legally blind. I need that liquidity by Friday to cover the margin calls on the Vance estate and my yacht maintenance fees. Just cook the ledger. I am Liam Sterling. These idiots hand me their retirement funds because of my last name. They practically beg me to take their money. Embezzling from them is not even a crime at this point, it is a public service. I am relieving them of the burden of wealth." The recording ended with a sharp, cruel chuckle. I pressed the button on my phone again, severing the connection. The ballroom was completely terrifyingly silent. The string quartet had long since packed away their instruments. The catering staff stood completely frozen against the walls. Liam stared at me, his mouth hanging open. The aggressive sunburned flush had completely drained from his face, leaving him the color of old parchment. The microphone slipped from his hand, hitting the stage with a loud, dull thud. He tried to speak, but only a dry, raspy wheeze escaped his throat. I slowly turned my gaze from Liam's terrified face toward the front row of the gala seating. These tables were strictly reserved for the most prominent high-net-worth investors in the city. They were the very same individuals whose retirement funds and corporate accounts were managed entirely by Sterling Capital. Arthur Harper, the 80-year-old billionaire, mentioned specifically in the audio recording, slowly stood up from his chair. His hands trembled with sheer, unadulterated fury. Beside him, 3 other prominent venture capitalists rose to their feet. The blood had rushed to their faces. They did not shout. They did not scream. Their anger was far too lethal for a public tantrum. Without a single word, Mr. Harper reached into his tailored jacket, pulled out his mobile phone, and dialed a number. The other investors immediately followed suit, turning their backs on the stage and marching swiftly toward the lobby, their voices low and urgent, as they frantically contacted their legal teams, their forensic accountants, and the federal authorities. Liam watched them walk away, his eyes wide and vacant. He stumbled backward, his knees buckling slightly. He was completely, irrevocably, and financially dead. The total suffocating silence in the ballroom was profound. Liam Sterling remained completely immobilized, his jaw hanging slack as he watched his former investors march out the towering brass doors, taking his entire future and his freedom with them. Chloe stood paralyzed near the intricately carved ice sculpture mascara running down her pale cheeks, utterly incapable of processing that her husband was destined for a federal penitentiary. The room was a vacuum of shock. All the wealthy eyes that had just watched Liam's catastrophic demise slowly rotated back to the base of the grand mahogany stage. They landed directly on Beatrice Vance. The matriarch of the fallen dynasty stood completely exposed. The heavy velvet curtains behind the stage offered absolutely no refuge. Her perfectly styled hair suddenly looked rigid and severe. Her emerald velvet gown seemed to weigh her down, anchoring her to the very floor she no longer owned. I looked down at her from the podium, offering zero mercy. The digital foreclosure documents remained projected brilliantly on the massive screen behind me, bathing the entire ballroom in the undeniable, irrefutable truth of her absolute failure. Beatrice's mind spun frantically. I could literally see the desperate, chaotic calculations flashing behind her widened, terrified eyes. She had lost her wealth. She had lost her social standing. She had lost her intimidation power. She had absolutely nothing left in her arsenal except the basest, most manipulative tactic she possessed. It was the ultimate trump card of a cornered, desperate narcissist facing total accountability. Pity. Beatrice's hand flew to the center of her chest. Her manicured fingers dug violently into the heavy velvet of her bodice. She let out a sharp, ragged gasp that echoed loudly across the quiet room. Her eyes rolled upward, showing the whites, and her knees buckled dramatically. She collapsed heavily onto the first step of the grand marble staircase, her body slumping against the polished stone like a discarded marionette. A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the elite crowd. The wealthy socialites who had just been relishing the scandalous financial exposure suddenly found themselves witnessing what appeared to be a fatal medical emergency. The mood in the ballroom instantly pivoted from morbid fascination to genuine frantic panic. Women covered their mouths in shock. Prominent businessmen shouted for someone to call emergency services. Marcus, who had been kneeling in the shattered remains of his champagne glass, scrambled wildly toward his mother. His face was a mask of pure terror, completely buying into her theatrical performance. He threw his arms around her slumping shoulders, lifting her head from the cold marble step. Beatrice's breathing was shallow and erratic, her eyelids fluttering dramatically as she emitted weak, strained groans. "Someone call an ambulance!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with hysterical panic. He turned his face upward, locking his terrified, tear-filled eyes directly onto me. He pointed a shaking, bloodied finger from the broken glass right at my face. "Look what you have done!" Marcus roared, his voice echoing violently through the grand ballroom. "You are killing her! You orchestrated this entire vicious spectacle just to humiliate us, and now you are actually murdering my mother. You are a murderer, Maya. Help her. Somebody. Please help my mother." The crowd surged forward slightly, a wave of expensive suits and designer gowns rippling with concern. A few people pulled out their phones, frantically dialing the authorities. The narrative was shifting exactly as Beatrice had intended. She was transforming herself from a financially ruined, deceitful fraud into a tragic, sympathetic victim of my supposed cruelty. Even while feigning unconsciousness, she was attempting to seize control of the room, using her own son's genuine panic as a highly effective shield. I did not move from the podium. I did not flinch at Marcus's screaming accusations. I simply stood under the glaring spotlight, watching Beatrice's eyelids flutter with a cold, analytical detachment. I had lived in their guest house for years. I had witnessed Beatrice deploy this exact same medical theater whenever she was losing an argument with her late husband, or whenever a contractor demanded payment she could not provide. It was a well-rehearsed, pathetic performance designed to halt any conversation she was losing. Before the panicked crowd could rush the stage and completely trample the scene, a tall, impeccably dressed man stepped smoothly out of the shadows near the catering entrance. He wore a tailored charcoal suit and carried a small, sleek black medical bag. He moved with a quiet, undeniable authority, parting the sea of hysterical billionaires simply by walking forward. "Step aside, please," the man announced, his voice carrying a calm, resonant weight that instantly demanded compliance. "I am a licensed medical professional. Clear the area and give the patient room to breathe." The panicked socialites immediately parted, allowing him a clear path to the grand staircase. Marcus looked up, his face streaked with tears and sweat, clinging desperately to his mother's slumping form. "Please," Marcus begged, his voice trembling. "She cannot breathe. Her heart is failing. Please save her." The man knelt gracefully on the marble step beside Beatrice. This was Dr. Harrison Thorne. He was the chief medical officer for Lumina Holdings, an elite diagnostician I kept on retainer for high-stakes corporate acquisitions and international travel. I had instructed him to remain close tonight, fully anticipating that Beatrice would suffer some form of psychological break when faced with her eviction. Dr. Thorne opened his black bag with smooth, practiced efficiency. He did not ask Marcus for any medical history. He simply went to work. He pressed two firm fingers against the side of Beatrice's neck, checking her carotid artery. He pulled a small, high-powered penlight from his pocket, gently lifting one of Beatrice's dramatically fluttering eyelids and flashing the beam across her pupil. He then retrieved a digital stethoscope, placing the metal disc firmly against her chest, right over the emerald velvet. The entire ballroom held its collective breath. The silence was absolute, broken only by Marcus's jagged, terrified sobbing. Everyone waited for the grim diagnosis. They waited for the announcement of a massive cardiac event brought on by the shock of public ruin. Dr. Thorne remained kneeling for exactly 20 seconds. He lowered his stethoscope. He clicked off his penlight and tucked it neatly back into his breast pocket. He did not look panicked. He did not bark orders for a defibrillator. He simply closed his medical bag and stood up, smoothing the front of his charcoal suit. He reached up and tapped the discreet, high-tech radio earpiece resting in his left ear. The audio was seamlessly routed through the ballroom's main speaker system, ensuring his medical assessment would be heard by absolutely everyone in attendance. Her pulse is strong and perfectly steady at 72 beats per minute, Dr. Thorne announced, his clinical, highly professional voice booming across the grand ballroom. Her pupillary response is completely normal. Her oxygen saturation is optimal. She is experiencing zero cardiac distress. Marcus stared up at the doctor, completely bewildered, his brain struggling to comprehend the words. "What are you talking about?" Marcus stammered, his grip on his mother loosening. She collapsed. "She is dying." Dr. Thorne looked down at Marcus with an expression of mild professional pity. "Her vitals are perfect," Dr. Thorne stated clearly, his voice echoing off the silk-draped ceilings. "It is just a theatrical panic attack. No ambulance is required. You can tell your mother to stand up now." A profound, deafening silence slammed back down over the Piedmont Elite Country Club. The wealthy guests, who had just been clutching their pearls in genuine horror, instantly stiffened. Their expressions of deep concern morphed rapidly into looks of sheer, unadulterated disgust. The manipulation was completely exposed. The ultimate victim card had been expertly intercepted and destroyed. Lying on the cold marble stairs, entirely stripped of her final defense mechanism, Beatrice Vance stopped groaning. Her dramatic, shallow breathing instantly ceased. Her eyelids stopped fluttering. Slowly, agonizingly, Beatrice opened her eyes in pure humiliation. She scrambled backward against the hard marble steps, her perfectly manicured nails scraping uselessly against the stone. The sheer suffocating weight of 1,000 judging eyes pinned her to the floor. There was no sympathy left in the Piedmont Elite Country Club. The city mayor, standing just a few feet away, shook his head in profound disgust and deliberately turned his back on her. The prominent city councilwoman she had elbowed earlier let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed brutally in the quiet room. Marcus remained frozen on his knees, his hands hovering awkwardly in the air over his mother. His tear-streaked face twisted into a mask of complete, bewildered betrayal. He looked at Beatrice, realizing with sickening clarity that she had willingly weaponized his genuine terror to save her own skin. Before Beatrice could force a pathetic excuse through her trembling lips, the towering stained glass windows lining the eastern wall of the grand ballroom suddenly ignited. Brilliant, aggressive flashes of red and blue light sliced through the darkness outside, painting the elegant silk drapery and crystal chandeliers in the stark, chaotic colors of a severe emergency. The wail of multiple heavy sirens pierced the thick mahogany doors, growing deafeningly loud, before abruptly cutting off right at the front entrance of the country club. The elite crowd instantly began to murmur, stepping aside and clearing a wide path down the center aisle of the ballroom. "Thank God!" Marcus gasped, his voice cracking with desperate relief. He completely ignored Dr. Thorne's professional assessment, his mind frantically clinging to the illusion of his mother's medical crisis. "The ambulance is here. Make way. My mother needs oxygen immediately." The heavy gold-plated double doors at the back of the ballroom did not simply open. They were shoved violently apart. But it was not a team of paramedics rushing into the room with a stretcher and medical bags. A synchronized squad of men and women in dark tailored suits and heavy tactical windbreakers marched into the pristine ballroom. Bold yellow lettering across their backs spelled out a single terrifying acronym: FBI. The heavy thud of their tactical boots against the polished marble floor echoed like a war drum, completely shattering the fragile, refined atmosphere of the charity gala. The country club security detail immediately stepped down, lowering their radios and allowing the federal agents absolute jurisdiction. The charity gala host practically sprinted off the stage, desperately trying to distance himself from the epicenter of the incoming destruction. The lead special agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a face carved from granite, marched straight down the center aisle. He did not glance at the frightened billionaires or the hiding socialites. His sharp, uncompromising gaze was locked directly onto the two figures cowering at the base of the grand staircase. Marcus stood up aggressively, waving his arms, his custom tuxedo jacket completely wrinkled and ruined by the champagne-soaked floor. "What are you doing?" Marcus screamed at the approaching agents, his voice high and frantic. "Where are the medics? My mother is having a heart attack. We need a doctor, not the police." The lead. Special agent stopped exactly 2 feet away from Marcus. He looked down at Beatrice, who was still sprawled on the marble, her emerald gown twisted around her legs. "We are not paramedics, Mr. Vance," the agent stated, his voice, a deep booming baritone that required no microphone to command the room. And considering the chief medical officer of Lumina Holdings just publicly verified her perfect health, she will not be needing a hospital. She will, however, be needing a federal defense attorney. Beatrice gasped, a genuine sound of sheer, unadulterated terror finally escaping her throat. She tried to scramble backward again, but 2 female agents swiftly flanked her, grabbing her by the arms and hauling her forcefully to her feet. Beatrice Vance Marcus. Vance, the lead agent, announced, his voice ringing with absolute devastating finality. "You are both under arrest." Marcus stumbled backward, his hands raised in a desperate, trembling gesture of surrender. "Arrest. On what charges? This is a private event. You have no jurisdiction here. You are being charged with federal wire fraud conspiracy and the systemic corporate embezzlement of over $15 million. The agent continued flawlessly reading them their rights as he pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Our forensic accounting unit, acting on a comprehensive dossier provided by Lumina Holdings, has spent the last 72 hours tracing your offshore shell companies. You funneled $15 million directly from your own corporate investors and your supposedly non-profit charitable foundations to cover your personal margin loans and luxury real estate debts." The entire ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. The remaining investors who had not already fled the building after Liam's disastrous audio confession began shouting furiously. The realization that the Vance family had been actively stealing from their own philanthropic charities to fund their country club memberships was the ultimate unforgivable sin. The social execution was complete. Marcus let out a guttural, wretched sob as the agent aggressively grabbed his wrist. The cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs clicked loudly into place around his wrists, locking his hands firmly behind his back. The custom $1,000 tuxedo sleeves bunched up uncomfortably around the metal. "No!" Marcus shrieked, his knees buckling entirely. He collapsed back onto the floor, completely destroying the last remaining shred of his pride. "Please, this is a mistake. My mother handled the accounts. I did not sign those wire transfers." Beatrice stared at her son in pure horror as he instantly threw her under the federal bus. But she could not speak. The female agents were already marching her toward the exit, her emerald gown dragging pathetically across the floor, her legacy completely reduced to ash. Marcus, left kneeling on the floor, surrounded by federal agents, completely broke down. Snot ran freely down his chin. His chest heaved with violent, uncontrollable sobs. He looked up, his bloodshot, terrified eyes locking onto me where I stood perfectly still on the stage above him. "Maya!" Marcus wailed, his voice a pathetic, agonizing screech. He literally crawled forward on his knees, straining against the handcuffs as an agent held him by the shoulder. "Maya, please. You have the money. You own the debt. You can stop this. Pay my bail. Please, I am begging you. We were married. We are family. Do not let them put me in a cage." I looked down at the broken, sobbing man kneeling in the glass. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no regret, just the cold, clean satisfaction of absolute justice. I slowly walked down the marble steps, the silver heels of my stilettos clicking sharply, until I stood directly in front of him. I looked down into his pathetic, tear-soaked face. Slowly, deliberately, I opened my diamond-encrusted clutch. I reached inside and pulled out a single crumpled piece of paper. It was the exact battered $500 bill Marcus had thrown at my feet on the freezing, snow-covered driveway the night he locked me out of my own life. I held the crumpled bill between my fingers for a brief moment, letting him recognize it, letting him understand the absolute poetic finality of this transaction. I dropped the crumpled bill. It fluttered through the air, landing softly directly on his lap. "Call an Uber," I whispered. The morning sun broke over the Atlanta skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across the imported Italian marble of my penthouse suite. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a steaming cup of black coffee in my hand, watching the city wake up to the greatest financial scandal of the decade. The news cycle was absolutely relentless. Every local channel, every national financial network, and every social media feed was entirely consumed by the catastrophic implosion of the Vance family empire. The Chiron banners flashing across my massive flat-screen television told the entire glorious story. Vance matriarch and heir arrested in multi-million-dollar embezzlement sweep, Liam Sterling assets seized amid federal fraud investigation. I watched a live helicopter feed circling the Sterling luxury condo building downtown. The footage showed a team of federal agents carrying out boxes of documents and placing heavy padlocks on the custom double doors of Liam and Chloe's residence. The trust fund Liam had boasted about just hours ago was completely frozen, seized by the government to pay back the investors he had so arrogantly defrauded. They were locked out, entirely stripped of their wealth, their status, and their shelter in a single devastating sweep. My security intercom buzzed sharply, pulling my attention away from the television. I walked over to the panel and tapped the screen. "Madam Maya," the building concierge said, his voice hesitant. "I apologize for the interruption, but there is a woman in the lobby demanding to see you. She says her name is Chloe Vance. She is highly distressed and refusing to leave the premises." "Send her up," I replied calmly. 5 minutes later, the private elevator doors hissed open, spilling Chloe into my foyer. The transformation was staggering. The woman who had stood in the country club last night, dripping in diamonds and sneering at my existence, was completely gone. Chloe looked utterly destroyed. Her hair, usually blown out to perfection, hung in stringy, unwashed clumps around her pale, tear-streaked face. She was wearing the exact same designer cocktail dress from the after-party, but it was now wrinkled and heavily stained. She clutched a small, pathetic leather overnight bag to her chest, like a life preserver. "Maya." Chloe gasped, practically stumbling into my pristine kitchen. She dropped the bag onto the floor and immediately burst into fresh, hysterical tears. "They took everything. The FBI was waiting at our building when we tried to go home. They seized Liam's accounts. They seized my credit cards. They even took my car. We have nowhere to go. Liam is sleeping on a bench in his lawyer's waiting room, and none of my friends will return my calls." I took a slow sip of my coffee, leaning back against the cool marble of my kitchen island. I did not offer her a tissue. I did not offer her a seat. "That sounds like a severe logistical issue, Chloe," I said, my voice perfectly level. "But I fail to see how your sudden homelessness requires my attention." She lunged forward, pressing her hands flat against the marble counter, her eyes wide and pleading. "Because we are family." "Maya," Chloe cried, her voice cracking with desperate manufactured emotion. "We are sisters. You cannot just leave me out on the street. I know Marcus and my mother treated you terribly, but you have to know I never wanted any part of that. My mother forced me to be cruel to you. She controlled the purse strings and she made me ice you out. I had to go along with her bullying just to survive in that toxic house. You know what she is like. You have to forgive me. Please, I just need a place to stay for a few weeks until this all blows over. Just one of your guest rooms." I stared at her, genuinely marveling at the sheer, unadulterated delusion it took to deliver that speech. She was actually trying to play the victim, attempting to weaponize a sisterhood that had never existed. "You expect me to believe Beatrice forced you to be a monster?" I asked, my tone dripping with icy disdain. "Beatrice did not force you to deliberately spill red wine on my only winter coat during a blizzard. Beatrice did not force you to loudly mock my background every time I walked into a room or laugh when Liam called me a charity case. You were not a hostage, Chloe. You were an eager, enthusiastic participant in my abuse because it made you feel superior. You enjoyed every single second of my misery." Chloe flinched, stepping back as if I had physically struck her. "But Maya, please," she sobbed, her hands shaking violently. "I have absolutely zero cash. I cannot even buy food. You have millions. You own Lumina. You can afford to help me. I will do anything. I looked at her pathetic, trembling form. The entitlement was practically baked into her DNA. Even now stripped of everything, she fully expected me to fund her existence simply because she asked. I set my coffee mug down on the counter. I turned around, opened the top drawer of my desk, and pulled out a crisp folded piece of paper. I walked back to the island and smoothly slid the folded document across the polished marble directly toward her. Chloe's eyes instantly lit up with desperate, greedy relief. She let out a wet, gasping laugh, eagerly snatching the paper from the counter. She clearly believed it was a blank check. She thought her pathetic performance had worked, that my inherent decency had overridden my logic, and that I was about to write her a six-figure bailout just to make her go away. "Thank you," she wept, her fingers fumbling excitedly with the fold. "Thank you so much, Maya. I promise I will pay you back the second Liam clears his name." She flipped the paper open. Her tearful smile instantly froze. The relief drained from her face, replaced by a look of sheer, uncomprehending shock. It was not a check. It was a standard entry-level employment application for Lumina Holdings. Specifically, it was an application for a night shift janitorial position at my corporate headquarters. I looked her dead in the eyes, my expression utterly devoid of mercy. "Bootstraps." "Chloe," I said, my voice cold and absolute. "Start pulling." I turned my back on her and walked out of the kitchen, signaling my security team to escort her out and let the heavy oak doors shut firmly behind me. True personal worth and independence are forged by breaking free from toxic family dynamics and societal expectations. The narrative teaches that being undervalued by arrogant, greedy relatives does not define your destiny. Instead of accepting the role of the scapegoat, you can quietly build your own strength through financial independence, unique talents, or undeniable truth. When pushed to the limit by betrayal, reclaiming your power and exposing hypocrisy becomes the ultimate victory. True success and reliance are the best revenge against those who belittle you. Stand up for yourself, share your triumphant story, and subscribe for more empowering video content.